We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 30th of May, 2020, as we once again get back into the broadcast here, documenting the crisis of our republic. Yes, I couldn't imagine it being in much more of a crisis than it is today, as our cities burn, and everything is being leveled today by a bunch of thugs all across the country. It's amazing what a difference a week makes. We went from lockdowns to an absolute war zone all across the country. It's just unbelievable what's going on right now. And for what? Because we have one guy get murdered. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the person's death, but ladies and gentlemen, people rioting, burning businesses down, killing people. I mean, because that's what's going on. There is killing going on, too. I mean, every day in Chicago, you want to riot? Every day in Chicago, people are killed, people are shot, people are murdered every single day, and in huge droves, huge numbers of people. Nobody riots over that. This is obviously not about this guy's death. And if anybody's been living under a rock for the last 5 days or so, let me just go down the laundry list here. Riots over, we're talking about riots over George Floyd, who was a black man who died in police custody. Actually, he wasn't really even in their custody. He was on the ground with a knee, Officer Derek Chauvin's knee in his neck. Okay, and he was there, and he died against the pavement. And this all started Tuesday night, I believe. All of these riots. I've been busy this week, so it's one of those situations that this is all kind of developing beneath the surface, and I wasn't even following it right away. Trump took to Twitter, and I'll get to that, I guess. But flames billowed out of the Minneapolis Third Police Precinct and the media likes to call them protesters. I don't call them protesters. You're a protester if you're carrying signs. You're not a protester if you're burning down buildings. At that point, you become a criminal. At that point, you become maybe even a domestic terrorist. And that's what I would categorize all of these people that are doing these things. I would categorize them as domestic terrorists. And I do believe our nation is under attack right now. This is a coordinated effort, ladies and gentlemen. It's very apparent to me that this is all coordinated. But these protesters burned down these buildings and then they took over the Third Precinct, the Third Police Precinct, and the mayor just handed it to them. He chose to withdraw the police, and I mean I understand it was a big situation where they were, but I mean I think at that point, you fight to maintain ground. I mean it's unbelievable that he would just pull the police out of there, and the National Guard. Why weren't the National Guard in there sooner? That's my question. Why weren't all of these things? There's a lot here that I don't understand. But I do have some audio today that we'll get to. But we have 500 National Guard troops finally did arrive in Minneapolis and the neighboring St. Paul to stop the unrest. Chaotic scenes and protests unfolded across several states after that. New York, Colorado, Ohio. There's a big long list, and maybe I'll find the list. It's just incredible. I was up till 6 o'clock this morning, past 6 o'clock this morning, and I feel like I'm not even prepared for the show because you can't possibly digest all of the stuff that's going on right now. Anyway, I want to bring in Vicky. I don't know how much of this you've been following, but this is, we've been glued to live streams in these towns, especially Minneapolis, where this all began, and it's riveting. But it's also very, very distressing, I guess you'd say, to see our country going up in flames right now. And I said we're under attack. This is obviously very coordinated.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I really wasn't watching it too much either. I mean, I saw the video streams of, riot here, riot there. I know they burned down a police building. But this morning when I listened to War Room, Steve Bannon, and he pulled together a much bigger picture of information warfare. Actually, it kind of seems like it might be the start of World War III, was my impression of what he was saying. And so
World War III being who being the warring parties?
Everybody being.
Okay, I see. I think.
But since it started in Minneapolis, I went back to and found links to the Obama administration counterterrorism event, 3-day counterterrorism event that was held in 2015, because the Minneapolis police participated in that event. And why did they? It's because of the big Somali community there. And what they were talking about was, under the heading of community policing, of course, integrating the Muslim community into law enforcement. And Keith Ellison, I don't know if you remember when he was in Congress, but in my opinion, I think he's a terrorist. And so you have an attorney general in Minnesota.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. That's a very good point. And because the reason why she calls him a terrorist is because Keith Ellison, let me find it in here. This is going to be one of those shows. I just don't. Okay, here we go. This is, I've got information. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. And that's not the right article. The article I was looking for was the one on Keith Ellison. Here it is. There's a couple of them, actually. The other one from Paul Joseph Watson was, we're going to start coming to the suburbs, according to what a rioter says. Ain't nothing left here. So they're burning stuff down to the point where they're saying, well, there's not enough here. Let's go start going to the suburbs and start tearing things up there. Well, people's homes are in the suburbs, and that's the problem. But anyway, Keith Ellison is the Attorney General. That's what she's talking about. And the Conservative Review says on Thursday, Democratic congressman, and this is an article, but which was put out January 4th, 2018. Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison, who serves as the deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, at the time he was, wrote a post on social media endorsing a book that promotes the far-left Antifa extremist group, promising that it would strike fear in the heart of Trump. And that's a direct quote, strike fear in the heart of President Trump. The tweet was at Moon Palace Books, and I just found out that the book that strike fear in the heart of Trump, and it's the Antifa rule book. What is it called? Do you remember? Anyway, it's their operation book. Anyway, and Keith Ellison, they say in January 26th, when he was running for Attorney General, they put out an article, Antifa General, Keith Ellison pondering Minnesota AG run. And it says, Keith Ellison, the far-left Minnesota congressman and deputy chairman of the Democratic National Committee, is contemplating a run for Attorney General of Minnesota. Now, he has since won that office. He's in there now. Politico reports that Ellison is bored in the House and wants to move his career in another direction. The AG seat is expected to open up soon because Lori Swanson, okay, we don't really need to know that. The point is that it says Conservative Review found that the Antifa book explicitly endorses physical violence against political opponents. In truth, violence represents a small, though vital sliver of Antifa fascist activity. One of the pro-violence passages from the book reads, regarding unprovoked occasional violence, the Ellison-approved book adds, fascist violence often necessitates self-defense. Although anti-fascists challenge conventional interpretations of self-defense grounded in individualistic personal ethics by legitimizing offensive tactics in order to forestall the potential need for literal self-defense down the line. Now, the point is that this book promotes violence, and Antifa obviously is a very violent group. All we have to do is see what its history and what they've been about. They're attacking. This is the extremist left, and I would say a terrorist group. That's my opinion. So the fact that this guy, who is an Antifa promoting individual, would be elected Attorney General. And by the way, I think the Department of Homeland Security considers Antifa a terrorist group. Do they not, Vicky?
I think they do.
Are you muted?
But they don't. Yeah, I was testing to see if my voice would come through. Thank goodness.
Actually, it does. It does a little bit, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think they do, but they don't ever talk about it. And
isn't that amazing?
We've got some real serious problems with acknowledgement, official recognition of the enemy. Okay, the enemy should be anybody who wants to tear down the United States, the government of the United States. And I don't care if they're white, I don't care if they're black, I don't care if they're Native American, I don't care if they're imported refugees from Africa, from, Somalis or whoever. I don't care. If you don't like our form of government and you want to tear it down, I consider you the enemy.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely, 100%. So, anyway, this Keith Ellison guy is very bad news, apparently.
I think he's really bad. I remember watching him in Congress, and then when he left Congress, he's really bad. He's a terrorist.
Yeah, and why? How? And here he gets elected. I guess it's an electable position because he was running for the office, and he gets elected as Attorney General there. So now he's in a position to prosecute or to not prosecute individuals as Attorney General. So how many of these people who are committing acts of terrorism are going to be prosecuted under his watch? How many, and how many innocent people could be prosecuted? As he is in this, basically you've got the terrorists. The chicken hawk is guarding the chickens is what it really amounts to, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, you know what? And I was totally on the side of everybody who was appalled by what happened to that guy. He was murdered, just out and out murdered.
Yeah.
And, I wanted the police, both of the policemen, his partner and the guy who was doing it, they both should be arrested and put on trial for murder, and maybe even the other two policemen for, what do they call it, when you're there but you don't stop it. I think they should all be put on trial for murder.
Accomplices, I think is the
yeah.
Or accessories.
Accessories, that's it, accessories. Because they had the power to stop it and they didn't.
Well, and the thing is I come back to none of this makes any sense from a logical standpoint. Because how many people were murdered and have been murdered every single night in Chicago? Mm-hmm. You got black on black violence. You got a lot of cops killing people in Chicago on a regular basis, and they're black people. It isn't like it's this is all just a racial thing. White people get killed too by cops, and you never hear about it. So
did you see that one story about it was a neighbor of the guy who murdered the George Floyd, and she said he was a cop. I thought he was
a real estate agent. Yeah,
a real estate agent.
I got that article here.
You know what? And to me, and plus the absolutely blatant way that the guy was murdered, it almost, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it almost seems like a setup. Okay, now...
Well, they knew each other, too. The other thing is they knew each other. Well, we don't know that they knew each other, but they both worked security at a club. So there's a very good likelihood that they knew each other. They worked overlapping shifts at this club, so they more than likely knew each other. And, what are we to make of this?
Yeah.
That was according to the club owner. She said she didn't recognize the guy at first, Floyd, George Floyd. She says, and then one of her employees, I don't think she owns the club now, but evidently she still is in contact with certain people that were at the club that used to work for her. Anyway, she says one of my former employees said that, hey, that's so-and-so, that's George Floyd. He used to work at the club. And she says, I didn't recognize him at first because he looks different with his face on the ground. But she says, I got to looking more closely, and she says, George, you're right. And then she realized that the cop with his knee on his neck was also. And so my question was, maybe they could have had a spat in the past or something like that. But the thought did cross my mind that the whole thing could just be a setup, too. So I don't want to go down that road too much because I like to have proof in order to, I'm a firm believer that, large claims require large proof. And unfortunately,
mine are just large questions.
Yes, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions.
And I also noticed that his partner, the other cop, was a Chinese guy. Okay, and that's significant given a whole lot of other factors that we can't really go into, and it would be speculation anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying I noticed.
Well, I wonder if it would be interesting to find out about his background, and is he native China or is he born here? That would be interesting.
I'm not sure how much that matters. China controls their people.
That's true. If he's got family in China, that would be a lot more of a concern, I think, because certainly they can hold.
I think you're right about that.
They can hold that over his head and control him basically remote control. Anyway, this thing. Let's see. We have 500 National Guard troops. Okay, we know about Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. There was also scenes that unfolded in New York, Colorado, and Ohio. There were also, in New York, there were officers that were brawling with rioters. At least 70 people were arrested in New York, I guess. In Denver, shots were fired at the Colorado State Capitol. Hundreds had marched there to demand justice, which doesn't make any sense, but okay. A car was filmed ramming a Black Lives Matter protester in Denver. In Kentucky, 7 were shot in protests over the death. Now see, this is the thing. You got people being shot. 7 were shot over the death of Black Breonna Taylor. She was shot dead by cops in March, and so I guess they're still reeling over that. But this is evidently fanned the flames and brought that back to the forefront. Ohio protesters breached the state house in downtown Columbus. So they were actually breaking windows in the legislature there, and they were stopped. Luckily, they were stopped by the cops. And by the way, I will say the White House was actually on lockdown too, because there were protests going on in Washington, D.C. And I do know that the Secret Service agent sustained a head injury. And I think it was because of projectiles being thrown. So that was going on at the White House. And I believe that I recall too reading that the Treasury Department building was breached in some way. And I don't know the extent of it, but it was breached.
That does seem like the beginning of a civil war, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a multi-theater war.
Yeah, it may have started with this guy, George Floyd, but
this was long in the planning.
I would say so.
So whether or not
it's been long.
My view on this, as it's being formed as events unfold, I believe a lot of times I think the planning was in place. Whether or not, you could say whatever you want. I'm going to operate under the assumption that the murder was real, that the knee and the neck was real. These two may or may not have known each other, but they did work at the same place, evidently, according to this club owner. But regardless, I'm going to operate under the assumption that all of the actual triggering event was real until I have evidence to prove that it was not real. Okay? So we'll just file everything else in the back of our mind, but we have to follow the path of most likelihood according to the evidence that we have. If we're going to deviate from that, we got to have evidence to prove the direction that we're going. I guess is what I'm saying, for lack of a better way of saying it. And but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether or not the triggering event is real. So as much as it matters that all of this going on is being carefully orchestrated. And I do think there's some evidence to prove that. And I've got some audio here to kind of help substantiate some of that. Let me just get through this bulleted list here. Some of this comes from the Daily Mail. They're pretty good at summarizing things. As a matter of fact, I've just about learned I don't have to read their articles because they pretty much bullet point everything in the article at the top, and you don't have to go down and read the article because the rest of it is repetition after their bullet points. But demonstrators damaged a police car in downtown Los Angeles and blocked traffic in San Jose. Traffic was blocked in Houston, Texas, while fires and looting took place in Dallas. In Detroit, protesters scuffled with police and broke out the windows of a police car. In Atlanta, ironically, and this is kind of interesting, the mainstream propaganda network that is most responsible for inciting racial tension and divisiveness and whipping mobs of rioters into a frenzy, and I'm talking about CNN. CNN in Atlanta was targeted. They had their windows broke out of the CNN headquarters building, and there was a mob of people that entered. I'm not sure if they got much farther than that. I tried to find some additional information, but they were actually inside the building, and also a police car there was destroyed as well. CNN, it's almost, I don't want to relish into any kind of destruction, but being that they have been promoting racial tension for so many years, these networks, you almost want to think they have it coming. I mean, if anybody deserves to have their place, treated in such a disrespectful manner, it would be CNN. And I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying, you get what you sow, people. That's the bottom line. And they're sowing racial discord. They have been for years. So I'm not encouraging it. I'm not calling for it. And it's still a crime. But anyway, footage surfaced on Monday showing. Okay, I think that's about the end of that. But this. I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead and jump to some of this audio. Both the victim, George Floyd, his killer cop, Officer Derek Chauvin, who has now been arrested, and he's been charged with, I think, third-degree murder and, what's the other charge?
Third degree? That should be first degree.
No,
that was totally intentional.
Yeah, he's been charged with third-degree murder, though. It was third-degree murder, and there's another charge that they leveled at him. I think it was manslaughter. Yeah. Third-degree murder and manslaughter.
See, there's something wrong there. Because that was not manslaughter. That was first-degree murder.
Well, they're trying to go light. They're trying to go light. And already they've put a shot across the bow, Vicky, no pun intended. They put a shot across the bow saying that there's evidence that he's not guilty. So
the cop is not guilty?
Yes.
How can that be?
Well, in the autopsy results came out, and they said he didn't die of asphyxiation. He didn't die of strangulation. They said he had underlying health conditions.
Oh, for heaven's sake!
Yeah, underlying health conditions.
Yeah. Okay.
They said he was
heart,
intoxicants. There were some
wasn't beating, and so he couldn't get air into his lungs.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. I'm not laughing about his death. I'm just laughing about the absurdity of this report. Here his face is on the ground. Okay, there's a knee on his neck. He's begging for air. He's begging that he can't breathe, and they're saying he had underlying health conditions. Oh my God. Oh man, sorry. I don't mean to laugh. Anyway,
it's the stupidity of the day.
Yes.
To say that the sky is orange when you can see that it's blue.
Yeah. Well, our sky, I think, is pretty gray at the moment. Actually, our sky is orange from the glow of all the fires that are burning at night. That's.
I chose a bad color then, didn't I?
Yeah. Well, at least the sky matches the man in the Oval Office. So there you go. Okay. Anyway, it's not. Let me just go to this. This is some audio. As we said, both the victim, George Floyd, his killer cop, Derek Chauvin, worked at security at the same club. This is the report from that, okay?
A stunning new revelation from the former owner of a South Minneapolis club. She's telling 5 Investigates that George Floyd and former officer Derek Chauvin both worked security for her at El Nuevo Rodeo out on Lake Street. Investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen just spoke with that woman. He's here now with more on what she said. Eric?
Jackie, to be clear, while Maya Santamaria says the 2 men worked for her as recently as last year, she says she does not know if Derek Chauvin and George Floyd ever actually spoke to each other. The first time she saw this video, Maya Santamaria says it took her a moment to make the connection.
Because my friend sent me and said, "This is your guy, the guy who used to work for you." And I kept saying, "It's not him." And then they did the close-up. And that's when I said, "Oh my God, that's him."
She says now former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin worked security for her at El Nuevo Rodeo for 17 years before she sold the club just months ago.
He sometimes had a real short fuse, and he seemed afraid. When there was an altercation, he always resorted to pulling out his mace and pepper spraying everybody right away, even when I felt it was unwarranted.
Even more surreal, Santamaria says, is that George Floyd, the man pinned under Chauvin's knee on Monday night, worked for her, too.
I didn't recognize George as one of our security guards because he looked really different lying there like that. And it wasn't until I saw the pictures of him come up, then it snapped, and one of my employees said, "Look, Maya, he worked for us."
Both men who worked security for the same club before their final encounter that left one dead and the other at the center of national outrage. But Santamaria says she does not know if they ever really knew each other.
They were working together at the same time. It's just that Chauvin worked outside and the security guards were inside. I thought to myself, what if he could have just said, "Hey man, you and I worked together at Maya's place, man. Like, remember me?"
Santamaria says George Floyd had been working security at her club for about a year. On some of their busiest nights, she said he might have been among 20 or 30 people she would bring in for security, in addition to off-duty police such as Chauvin. We've reached out to Chauvin's attorney and the Minneapolis Police Department about this development, but at this point, we're still waiting to hear back from both of them.
What do you think of that?
That's pretty interesting.
Very small world, isn't it?
Yeah, very small world, and just coincidentally, one of them happens to kill the other. But you know what? I would hope that somebody would really pursue the angle that the guy who was supposedly the cop was a real estate agent.
Yeah.
That's really significant as far as I'm concerned, especially, with the other cop being with him being a Chinese guy. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but this whole thing doesn't add up right.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny business. Stuff that smells funny anyway. Anyway. And
we know that just because a person goes into jail doesn't mean that they necessarily stay in jail. Especially when you have a terrorist as the attorney general.
Well, that's the whole point right there. They got pretty much the fixes in. As long as this Keith Ellison is attorney general, an Antifa sympathizer. That's what he is. He's an Antifa sympathizer. So if he's not a terrorist himself, he certainly is a sympathizer with terrorists, a recognized Homeland Security recognized terrorist group. People need to really ponder that. We have in Minnesota an attorney general who is a terrorist group sympathizer. That's a pretty serious situation. Anyway, there's a lot of talk. You know, I'm bothered by the fact that you have all these businesses going up in smoke, and you know they, I guess, are trying to target just the white businesses. You know.
Well, gee, what a surprise.
You know, because this is a racial war. Although, to be honest, Vicky, watching these videos, there were an awful lot of white people that were looting stores. There were an awful lot. I would say just as many white people, as far as I could tell from the videos I was seeing, that were there starting fires and you know, going in, busting windows and taking things.
Yeah, well, the communists, a lot of them are white, you know, and they would like to destroy white people. I mean, how that makes any sense in a person's mind, how they process that, I have no clue.
Yeah, but isn't just the white people that are, you know, hurt by the riots. A local news station featured a black owner who was literally crying on camera.
Today, we found Corboy Bala, who invested his life savings into opening this sports bar, cleaning up. While our camera was there, looters came back to try to steal his safe.
Right, trying to steal the safe!
I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to work so hard to get him. So hard.
This guy didn't have any insurance. And poured his whole life savings into this. And see, they're trying to get black people that are able to build in black neighborhoods businesses to try to help bring the black areas out of poverty and to better themselves. And so you've got these business owners who have taken advantage of programs or managed to save up their entire life or whatever to start a business. And, you know, I hear people, in fact, I've talked to people about this. I know a particular person that I have in mind right now. I won't say who it is. They said, well, you know, it's no big deal because they got insurance, so insurance will pay it. Number one, I would say, have you ever dealt with an insurance claim?
Yeah, right.
They don't like to pay. They may grudgingly pay something, but typically it's not what you want them to pay, and it's not what you need them to pay.
And it's not what they owe you.
And that's assuming you have insurance. And that brings me to my next point. Many of these people don't have insurance. Like this guy right here. He probably can't afford it. You know, it's a depressed area. And many of these places are just barely eking it out anyway. I mean, especially, you know, this all comes on the heels of this COVID-19. I say on the heels, really, it's still going on. They still got the lockdown in place here in Michigan. She just extended it to the middle of June. You know, there's no end in sight to any of this stuff. But we've got this COVID-19 thing going on, and then you got right in conjunction with that now, the city's going up in smoke. And so businesses are suffering really, big time. Go ahead.
What really bothers me is that we see all of this happening, but there doesn't seem to be any actions toward preemption. It's like, you know, we see the train rolling down the tracks. We're standing in the middle of the tracks, and nobody is doing anything to push people off the tracks. You know what I mean? No preemption, even though we can see where it's going, where it's headed.
I think people are shell-shocked in many ways, and I think people don't really know what to do. They don't have any solutions, you know, other than to be on the internet and to try to figure out what's really going on. You know, you got internet sleuths, which is a good thing. I'm glad they're doing it, but we got to be careful about the information that we forward too. There's claims people are making, you know, wild claims about certain things. You know, people. There's a lot of unsubstantiated stuff flying around on the internet. Let me just put it that way. And you got to really be careful, because some of this stuff, if you go public with it, you can get sued. You know, even forwarding, and people need to realize that. The internet is a very serious thing. If you get on there and you start pushing forward unsubstantiated claims about somebody being, like, for instance, an agent provocateur, you can be held liable for that. I mean, civilly. I mean, you can be sued. And there's a particular officer who was being accused of being an agent provocateur. And now, I won't give his name, but the police department claims that he had an alibi for the night that they said they looked into it. He had an alibi for the night, and it checked out. I guess multiple parties said he was not anywhere where he could have been doing this. But there's this claim of this umbrella man, this man holding an umbrella, and I guess he had a hammer or something, was busting windows, and that evidently that was a flashpoint in starting a lot of this stuff. And this man had a mask on his face, like a gas mask, it looked like. Something resembling that anyway. And supposedly his wife had a chat message going back and forth with somebody saying that this is him, and or his ex-wife, I should say. And she recognized the gloves and all that. And I don't know where this chat screenshot came from, and I don't know, that's the problem is this stuff gets put forth, and there's nowhere to verify any of it. So interesting
that she identified him by the gloves.
Yeah, the gloves. Also, she said she recognized.
Big clue was the ex-wife part.
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, that part is believable. Well, the whole thing is believable because there are agents provocateur, and I do believe that there's that's going on. I mean, you've got multiple reports now of people outside a particular town coming in. There have been a number of people, a number of departments. I know Detroit, they said that there were people that were not from Detroit, that were not from Michigan, and they were coming in there. And the same thing happened in Minneapolis. In fact, I've got some audio here regarding that. But I just want to caution people, because you do have to be careful, because you can be held civilly liable for even forwarding messages if it can be traced back to you as being the originator of it.
And criminally liable if they get hurt because
that's
you
true.
did that.
That's true. It's a serious thing, especially given how these things go so viral so fast. You got to be careful about it. Now, this is Minneapolis Police Chief Medaria Arredondo. He says that, just what we were just talking about, that many of the rioters were people who were not from the city.
What we experienced, which was a different dynamic shift from the first evening of the demonstrations, were there was a different tenor last night. There was a different group of individuals, and I want to preface this. The vast majority of people that have come together have been doing so peacefully. But there was a core group of people that had really been focused on causing some destruction. Certainly we saw that with some of the looting and setting fires. We were certainly prepared in terms of that immediate area to provide for the safety. But if you followed, of course, the events last night, the crowds got larger and they became more mobile. And so, our number one priority is the preservation of life, and so we wanted to make sure that we were looking at that from those who are gathering peacefully in the area, who are also being threatened and risked, our neighboring residents, and also those businesses. And so there was a shift that certainly occurred last night.
Anything about their allegation that there are some of the people who started some of the break-ins, looting of businesses, were folks outside agitators? We've been hearing people all over social media right now. Any leads on that?
We continue to follow that information, that intel. I'm keeping the mayor briefed on that as we speak.
he was talking. In case you didn't hear, the reporter question was about the outside agitators.
I will just say that it was clear to me, and also hearing from our local community leaders, that many of the people that were involved in the criminal conduct last night were not known Minneapolitans to them. And so yes, there were certainly people who were involved in the activities last night that were certainly not recognized as being here from the city.
So there you go.
Yeah, imported communists taking the opportunity to try and start the war.
Imported terrorists. I would just call them terrorists, and probably Marxist revolutionaries, if we want to really get down to it. Because that's what's going on here. This is completely out of the Jan Kozak playbook for revolutionary. Everything that they're doing. I would encourage people to go back and look at that book, which is a translation. It's called "And Not a Shot Is Fired," where Kozak lays out their playbook, exactly how they conducted a communist revolution without ever having fired a shot. It's remarkable. I mean, from the slogans, from getting control of the youth, everything that is happening today in America resembles that.
Who wrote that book?
It's probably, I'm not sure how you pronounce the first name. It's Jan. So is it Han Kozak? It's probably Han.
Okay.
He's the guy who. In fact, I don't have it within arm's reach. Otherwise, I've read parts of it on the show before, but it's not even a very thick book. It's actually pretty thin, but they lay out the steps that they took to translate, to transition their country, and I want to say Czechoslovakia. But I'll see if I can find that during the break. I'll see if I can run out. It's probably out in the barn. I'll see if I can run out there and during the break and grab that if I can locate it real quick. But anyway,
well, if you can control people's perception, which is what the mainstream media is trying to do. Actually, there are a lot of people on the internet that are trying to do that too. But if you can control their perception of events, then it can be anything that you want it to be. So
they're shaping the propaganda in such a way that they're shaping for many people that are absorbed in it, that are immersed themselves in media, immerse themselves in the news, and they trust what these talking heads on TV say. I mean, that is their reality. That becomes their reality.
Yeah.
And that's frightening given how incredibly twisted and contorted these narratives are.
And in our schools, they have been teaching the children groupthink. Which means that if you have one leader of the group who is an insurgent, he controls the whole group because they groupthink. They don't think individually.
Yeah, and they work on projects together and stuff. And I noticed a lot of that. That is a regular thing now in the schools, where you're not judged by your own individual performance as an individual. You're judged by the performance of the group. So if you get some lazy people in the group that let everybody else do the work, or one or two people in the group might do all the work, and the rest just don't contribute much.
Right.
But
they all succeed.
or fail.
Or fail.
As the case may be. Anyway, I watched a lot of the coverage coming down off of WCCO. There were a number of different streams. You had people running around there on Periscope, which was, interesting. I've learned Periscope and Twitter are really, I hate to say it, I don't like Twitter in many respects, but for breaking news, Periscope and Twitter are some of the best sources of information. And, but you do have other outlets as well. I mean, sometimes you can get some stuff off of YouTube. I know a lot of people get stuff off of Facebook, but I don't have a Facebook account. But I tend to go to, and even if you don't have a Twitter account, you can search for tweets and stuff, and you can find stuff because most accounts are public information. And Periscope, I think you can watch video streams on Periscope, but the nice thing about it is I typically put in a certain location, and a lot of stuff comes up as a result of that. And you can see people on the ground. So, I mean, really, in many respects, a lot of what's going on today, I mean, you can completely bypass the establishment chokeholds on information and go directly to people who are actually on the ground and see some of the stuff that's going on. And so, in many respects, this is a very great time to be alive. We have front row seats to history, and we don't have to rely upon other people. And I can tell you that from watching what I've watched, a lot of the information that came out, some of the best information was just citizen journalists on the ground. Just people, ordinary people, with nothing more than a smartphone walking around and showing the burning, showing the stuff that they're seeing, and then making comments about it, what they've heard. You can find out a lot of information about that. And it's not it's a form of documentation that in the sense that it's video and audio. Now, naturally, any claims that are made, are not verified. But you have a lot of that with the regular media, with the establishment media. But I did find WCCO TV in Minneapolis to be of some use. Some of the commentary that was coming, and this is why I believe local affiliates are important, because when breaking stories happen, unless a memo comes up from on high, telling them to do certain things a certain way and not say things, and I think there's some of that does happen sometimes, but they typically report what they see, these local affiliates, and this WCCO is in Minneapolis was right there. And they're commenting about some of this stuff. Why there was no police presence. And that's the thing. My wife and I were looking at this, and it seemed like nobody was. I don't understand why it took so long for the cops to show up. Why did it take so long for the National Guard to get control of the situation? It's difficult for the average person to get their mind around the scope and size of this unrest. So they were talking about this on the news. What's going on? Why is this being allowed to go on? Go ahead.
When I was in Portland, there were a group of Antifa who were protesting, I forget, outside, maybe it was the city building or something. But when the Portland police arrived, I mean, it was a sight to behold. I mean, they were like in full riot gear, and they, were marching, not marching, but kind of marching in a very intimidating way. And so, and Portland is a leftist city, and it was a leftist group that was protesting. So I have to believe that there's something very wrong with policing in Minnesota if there were no police, no trained police out there while this was going on.
Well, they claim that they were, and they were being overwhelmed. I do have some audio from the governor, and I have some audio from the public safety commissioner later on. We'll get to that. But anyway, this is WCCO talking about, we need help. Why aren't we getting it?
Can we talk about this police thing and the help and what this means first? Because,
of course,
last night at 1:30 in the morning, I'm listening to a press conference from the mayor, and he immediately, the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, says, we need help. And then today I heard a press conference from Melvin Carter at 2 o'clock, and he says, we needed help, and we need help. It sounds like this is help. I mean, can you get over the political hurdle of the president wants to provide you help? Because tomorrow we could have anywhere between 10 and 50,000 people here. And frankly, I think when I just talked to the Assistant Chief Tyner, and I said, why aren't you getting to fires on time? He said, we had delay getting assistance from the Guard earlier in the evening. Is there any debate any longer that we need help?
Well, I think there is. Frank, actually. The question is, and it's a really good question that you're asking, if we cannot contain the violence with the National Guard, with the State Patrol, with all the local police and the mutual aid from all of the police departments around the state, and this is the great question that we have tonight, then how do we stop the violence? The question is President Trump calling for the military police, asking the Pentagon to activate military police to come to Minnesota with the cooperation of the governor, or because he thinks that's what's needed, even if the governor he has not consulted? We don't have an answer to that. I have reached out to the governor's office to ask. But, of course, Frank, that is the question. If we can't control it with what we have, what's next? What's the next level? Why haven't we arrested people who have defied the curfew that was imposed in the Twin Cities? So those are the questions that I think need answers, and a lot of people are asking them.
Okay, I'll tell you what. We almost up to the break right now. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Stay with us, folks. Govern America continues. It's kind of a different kind of show today. Feels a little discombobulated, to be frank with you. But given the circumstances, discombobulation seems to be the state of our country right now. So maybe it's fitting. Stay with us. We'll be back here in just a moment.
Truth for the restoration of our nation.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It continues to be the 30th of May, 2020, as we get right back into the show here, hour number 2. The website for the show is governamerica.com. That's governamerica.com. My email address is radio@governamerica.com. Vicky, you want to give your information out, please? Oh, sorry. It might help if I turn your mic on. Go ahead.
My website is www.thetechnocratictyranny.com. And my old website is channelingreality.com. And my email address is eyeswideoopen@channelingreality.com.
All right. TheTechnocraticTyranny.com was the first website.
Yeah, I really messed that up, didn't I?
No, your Skype, I think, cut out a little bit briefly when you said it.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, before the break, we were sharing some audio from the it was from the coverage of WCCO television. And by the way, during the break, I just wanted to touch upon this real quickly. This comes from Vice.com, and I guess they're citing Motherboard on this. Customs and Border Protection is flying a Predator drone over Minneapolis. The surveillance drone is flying in a circle above the city, which has broken out in protests over the police killing of George Floyd. And they have a map here where, with a light blue, circle, where the plane is flying over. It's just making circles in the air. Evidently, I guess it's a surveillance drone. I guess it's not weaponized. They say
you never know.
Customs and Border Protection is flying a Predator drone, military technology used for surveilling and killing terrorists abroad, over Minneapolis as protesters continue to demonstrate against police brutality, according to publicly available flight data. The drone flown over Minneapolis is an unarmed version of the aircraft. Okay, that's what they... Okay. So the drone was first spotted on a flight tracking tool by members of the ADBS Exchange, whatever that is. I'm not sure. Anyway, it says... it's a community of flight watchers who use open-source flight data to monitor America's skies. Presumably, the drone is surveilling protests there, though CBP did not respond to requests for comment about what the drone is doing there. So just another little weird thing going on.
I would be very surprised if there weren't a lot more drones than just that.
Well, we don't really know. I mean, that's the thing, is that's the one that shows up on their radar or whatever, on their maps. What do we have up in the sky that don't? And I recall back some time ago, it seems like I vaguely remember that there were multiple cities that were being monitored by some of these surveillance drones. So this could be going on actually on a wide-scale basis, and we just don't know about it.
Well, even the small town that I live in, the sheriff's office has a drone, or one or more drones. He said they use it just to find lost people, or mostly lost children. But
a Predator drone, though?
But the thing is, they have it, and they can launch it anytime they want. So,
well, see, even hobbyists have these little small drones. Mm-hmm. I think some of them are called Phantom. They're little small things with a camera on it. You can take pictures. You can fly it around. Hobbyists, a lot of hobbyists are involved in that. So police departments and farmers and everything else. I know tower crews for radio stations and TV stations use them to inspect the towers. So, but I mean, Predator drones are a different story. These things are huge compared to this little small hobbyist types. And
is that what they said it was? As a Predator?
Yes, they said it was a Predator drone. It was one of these militaristic, like they used to bomb people in Afghanistan and stuff.
Well, you know what? When I was growing up, the rule was that looters would be shot on sight. And sometime, I'm not sure if they changed it in the 1990s, but at some point they changed that and just, let the looters and the rioters just riot.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Stephanie's...
I don't know, I kind of think they need to go back to the old way of doing things. If you loot, riot, set fire to buildings, you might end up dead.
It's kind of like what Stephanie Rollins Blake said after in Baltimore when they were having a riot there. And we played this audio on the show a number of times. But she said that she basically ordered the cops to stand back, and I'm paraphrasing here. I don't want to say something she didn't say, but she said we gave them space to destroy. That space to destroy is a direct quote. As a matter of fact, here's the audio. This is one of those shows. Let me see. Okay, here we go.
And I've made it very clear that I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balancing act, because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well.
Okay.
So free speech includes destroying things.
Yes.
Destroying things. You know what? That kind of goes back to the burning of the flag, doesn't it? Yeah. It's the idea that violence or any sort of violent protest is a form of free speech. But if that's true, then we're
well.
On
if that's true,
the time.
Let's take that logic, if we can use that word in this context. Let's take that to its farthest extent. I mean, if destruction is an exercise of free speech, then I would hate to be within arm's reach or bullet's reach of someone who wants to exercise their free speech with regard to my physical safety.
Right,
right.
If
maybe
exactly. How far does it go? Does destroying your life, is that somebody else's free speech?
Yeah, I mean, if they decide to shoot me, that you could make the argument that they were expressing their rage at me for something. If they decide to beat me up, that's certainly an expression. That is an expression of anger and maybe frustration and dislike, and I mean, you could make that argument if you wanted to. This is the kind of lunacy, Vicky, that has been unleashed on the population. How did this woman become the mayor of Baltimore? And I mean, that was an old clip. Okay, that was not something she just said. We played that in the past. My question is that standard being applied again today? Are these people being allowed to go? Now, the police department says no. We're being overwhelmed. And that may be true. And there's some pretty chilling stuff. There's some pretty chilling stuff that came out of a press conference that happened last night at about, I'd say, 3:30 Eastern time. 3 o'clock. It was late. It was in the wee hours of the morning. I think it was like 2:30 Central time, which is what Minnesota is on. There's some pretty bothersome things that they had to say about the size and organization of this crowd. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, we were talking before the break because they were asking the question on the news during the continuing coverage of this thing, why is there a fourth night of protests? Why is this going on? Because this is very important, because they're getting ready to have evidently a massive protest today. There's organizations that are calling for people to descend upon Minneapolis to talk about they're in other words, they're having an event dealing with this George Floyd's death, some kind of an event, which I guess would be a mourning event, but they're anticipating people.
Is not mourning.
Exactly. But they're anticipating a lot of people descending upon the town today from gathering information from that press conference. So anyway, this is the question, though, that WCCO, the commentators, were asking last night. Why is this continuing to go on? Where are the police? Where's the National Guard? Why has this not been stopped? And that's what all of the residents there are asking.
Wednesday was horrible. Thursday was horrific. Friday's turning out to be bad. I guess bad is better than horrific. But I don't know what tomorrow holds when you have this protest that's been called for nationally to come to our state.
Yeah, I mean, the question that I'm getting from our viewers is why is this happening at all? Why did it happen on the first day and the second and the third and then the fourth? And why is it that we have a curfew and we see thousands and thousands of people out disobeying, defying a curfew order, and nothing happens? And that's what I think a lot of Minnesotans who are watching this unfold tonight. That's a question that I think many people are asking of Governor Walz and the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the police and law enforcement that we have deployed now to try to restore order.
I got, you get a lot of tweets and emails when you're on the air for a long time. And I'm having people tell me, hey, I called 911 12 times tonight. They never picked up. I don't see police anywhere. I haven't seen one guard trooper. I have seen people walking around with a sledgehammer and another guy that looked like he had an axe or a 2x4. And I see a lot of burning buildings. And at the same time, there's people that have a ton of sympathy for the underlying situation. But even when we were up in North Minneapolis, people are like, hey, the underlying situation isn't going to change by continuing to burn things, is it?
Yeah. So that's the commentary. Now, I want to get to the some of the what was going on in the press conference, because this is well, actually, no, this isn't the press conference yet. This is commentary also by the news people. They're discussing how the protests seem to be very organized.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We'll try to find out if there is anything going on down in Nicollet, because if they're sending more resources down there, it makes me wonder, because I know all throughout the city there have been protests in different areas.
Yeah, for sure, and they pop up. Almost, it seems like they've got just a few people, and because of social media and because they're in such a large group, they can get the word out so quickly. I couldn't believe how quickly they exited at 35W and Washington, and everybody knew to go to the 4th Precinct. Those that chose came this way, others did not, but it was amazing how quickly they were able to organize that and then move on to the next stop, whatever the next stop is. And now you can see that a lot of the police cars are starting to leave the scene of this. I don't know if they're going on to as you mentioned, a next mission, a next protest spot, a next hot spot, I guess we'd call it. But they are leaving the scene, this scene, and so they must feel fairly comfortable that they've got enough troops left back in the 4th Precinct to solidify it and guard it.
Did you hear what he said? This sounds to me like the people, and they keep calling them protesters, I'll call them terrorists, are getting their messages, and they're being told to go from one place to the other. They're being told.
Oh, I'm sure they're getting text messages, text alerts. I'm on a couple of different lists for text alerts.
Yeah, and I think it might even be, I don't know, it may be text alerts, it may be, but there's definitely a command center, in my view. This sounds very sophisticated, very well organized, and it sounds like there is a command center which is monitoring what's going on, probably monitoring the police frequencies as well. And they're determining what to do based upon what they're hearing and the intelligence that they're getting. And they're feeding out to their troops on the ground, you should move over here, you should move over there, go to this area. The police are coming over here, so we need to go over there. And that's the kind of thing. This sounds to me like a lot like terrorist whack-a-mole. If I can be kind of, it almost sounds absurd to say it that way. But it is. It's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, where you're trying to go from one place to the other, and you're trying to you send your resources. And the other tactic that I'm seeing here, based upon all the coverage I'm hearing, is that they're changing their tactics in accordance with when the cops go in with a strategy. The strategy then becomes, it's kind of like what they do in football. Okay, I'm on dangerous ground here because I'm not a sports person, but I know that the sports teams tend to huddle. They huddle and they determine what their play strategy is going to be, and then they try to execute their plan. Okay, and And that's kind of what the cops are doing here, where they huddle together before a night begins, and they determine what resources they need, where they're going to need, utilize those resources, and execute that plan based upon past, what they've saw previous nights. But the problem is when they get out there, everything's different. The whole game plan has changed. The whole strategy has changed. Instead of concentrating, for instance, in a certain area, they move to another area.
Yeah, well, I think that
and they
was
spread
the significance of that counterterrorism conference and the infiltration of the Minneapolis government and probably the Minnesota state government too. And so if you have people on the inside who, and I know people are not going to like this, but Keith Ellison, he's a Muslim Brotherhood. And if you understand that their version of Islam is the radical version of Islam,
yes,
where you have your religion and your political state are one and the same.
The Sunni Wahhabists.
Well, I think it's just a different version of Islam. It's the fundamentalist, and
yes,
I don't know that
Sunni,
it's just
the
Wahhabism.
Sunni. Well, that's the one that I believe that's the one really that is problematic. The Shia, they typically are the more peaceful. That's not to say they couldn't.
Well, the Iranians are Shia, aren't they?
Yes.
Okay, well, they're ruled by the I want to say Khomeini, but I know it isn't Khomeini anymore. But by an imam.
Right.
He runs the government, that's the nature of Islam.
Yeah, and I would suggest that, they're more. I mean, if you look at their society, the Iranians, their women don't have to, their women have a lot more abilities, freedoms than say a country like Saudi Arabia, where it's a lot more restricted. They're beheading their people all the time. They're stoning women all the time. They treat women like crap.
Yeah.
So
well, that's a separate issue, though, than the political organization, because
but it all comes together.
What's really important is that they combine religion and the governing of the society.
Yeah, well,
so just because some of them give women a little more leeway doesn't change the organizational structure where you have a combined religious leader as the political leader.
Well, what I was getting at is I was using the women thing as an example because that seems to be a big thing in Muslim, I hate to use the word communities. It seems to be a big thing with Muslims, how they treat women's rights, but it's also tolerance.
Well, it is.
Tolerance
but it is secondary to the high-level organizational structure of power.
Okay, let's talk about tolerance for other beliefs. Okay, let's talk about how many Christians live in Iran, for instance. There's a lot of Christians that live in Iran. Saudi Arabia, not so much, because you'll be killed if you're a Christian in Saudi Arabia. So it's things like that I'm talking about. The Shia, a country like Iran with a Shia population, Shia Muslims, they tend to have more freedom, and they tend to have more tolerance for other belief systems that are not their own. Where in the Sunni Muslim population, and I mean the Sunni Wahhabist countries, because I'm not saying all Sunnis are bad either. And that's where it gets complicated and I think confusing for all of us, is that here in the West, I think we tend to just, lump them all together. Oh, they're all a bunch of Muslims and, they're filthy heathens and,
Well, yeah, but I don't see. I don't know. We need to be able to ask somebody who is an expert in this, because I don't think you can say just because they're Shia that they are necessarily much more moderate than Sunni Wahhabists, because I'm sure there are Shia that live in other places other than Iran. And see, I don't think all Shia live in just Iran. But
no, I'm not. I'm not suggesting
I don't think
that.
you can attribute it to that, because if you remember, you may be too young to remember, but when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over Iran's government, the women were locked down. They did have to wear the beekeeper suits.
Okay.
And it was really extremely oppressive, the same way that the Wahhabis are. But over time, they had who was that? Rafsanjani. I think he was a little bit more moderate than the imams of the past, and so they lightened up a little bit. But I don't think that any more than, whoever is sitting in the office of the presidency changes our form of government and the basic rules by which our government operates, or at least should operate, I should say. I think you have to separate the two.
Yeah. Well, I don't pretend to fully understand, all of the. I'm a student of this very much, and I think you would say that you are too. I mean, I think
absolutely.
I think we're studying this, trying to understand it all, and I just know that I've seen, for instance, Rick Steves on PBS. He went over there and was able to walk around in Iran. He talked to a lot of the people. They were friendly. They seemed to like Americans, despite the tension between governments. And the whole time I was thinking, that because at the time the administration, even the Obama administration, I think was in office at the time. And it doesn't matter though, because the policy hasn't changed since Trump has come to office. And I remember thinking at the time, as he's walking around talking about these people, talking to these people, and they spoke very good English. They seemed very well educated, and many of them women, and they seemed happy. And it was remarkable to me to see this. And I remember thinking, they want war with this country, and they want to destroy these beautiful people. For what purpose? If the people at the State Department have their way, and this is what I was thinking at the time, if the warhawks at the State Department and the neocons have their way, this country is going to be as destroyed as Afghanistan, as destroyed as Iraq. They want to make Iran, they want to turn Iran into this, the same types of destruction that you have in other Middle Eastern countries and Northern Africa.
Well, we have a schizophrenic government, and that's a fact. You've got part of the government saying one thing and the other part of the government saying something else. I think the State Department, the U.S. State Department, is almost like an enemy within.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
As a matter of fact, I do consider them the enemy within, embedded within our government.
Well, I can certainly agree with that. Absolutely. Anyway, continuing on here, back to the WCCO coverage, they talk about how the Pentagon has now activated military police to restore order.
We've been talking to some Republican officials tonight who have been in contact with the White House. They tell us that President Trump has been monitoring the situation here in Minneapolis, all of the conflagration, the fires, the chaos, and the out of control, it appears, a lot of the chaos is happening, the violence in Minneapolis. So it appears now we can confirm, the Associated Press is reporting that the Pentagon is taking that step of activating military police to come to Minneapolis to try to restore order. Now, I have reached out to the governor's office to ask for comment on this. We don't know if the governor's office is involved in this, but I do know that there are high-level politicians here in Minnesota who have been in contact with the White House about this. Now, President Trump famously tweeted last night a very controversial tweet about how Minneapolis was having so much violence, and he said that he was prepared to take control of Minneapolis, in the president's words, and if the looting starts, the shooting starts. Something that he was criticized heavily for suggesting that we would shoot looters here in Minneapolis. And he had a press conference today, and everybody wanted to ask him about it. It was a press conference, however, on China, and he took no questions, talking about China and COVID and the WHO. But the bottom line here is that the president is very concerned, is what I'm being told. The president is very concerned about what's happening in Minneapolis. He has ordered the Pentagon to activate military police to come to Minneapolis to help restore order. So that is a level of police and law enforcement that we have not seen here in Minneapolis in all of my years.
You know what? I really would not want any Idaho police officers or actually military to go to Minnesota, because I don't consider the leadership in Minnesota to be entirely on the American side.
Right.
So if you're going in and you the leadership that's supposed to be friendlies are the enemy themselves, then you're just sending them into a trap. So I think Trump was right to say, and he should absolutely stand by it, you know, if we send in federal troops, it's going to be to kick ass. And that's the end of it. You know, just if they're in the street rioting, shoot them dead.
Yeah, I would go along with that. If they're looting stores, you're going in a store, you're breaking windows. I mean, it's not hard to, and by the way, I'll just say this real quick, and I've said it before. We have gun grabbers who try to get up and say that you don't have the right, you don't have the need for an AR-15, or you don't have the need even for a machine gun. Okay? And I would just argue that what we've been seeing play out over the last several days, is a demonstration of exactly why you do need those things. A mob of people coming at you, when you've got a mob of people coming at your business or your home, because these people have talked about moving to the suburbs, as we said a little bit ago. When you've got a mob of people burning things, and they're coming potentially to your home, your place, next, I would suggest your little six-shooter is not going to do the job. When you've got a mob of people, you'll just make them angrier. I mean, at that point, you're in a war-type situation. You need a weapon that's going to do the job for you. So these characters they're largely on the left, but there are some on the right that want gun control. I would suggest to everybody, this is exactly the reason why you do need those things, and that they have no right to tell you what you should or should not have, because you never know what you're going to need until you're in the situation where you need it. So that's my little soapbox comment. Anyway, they go on to talk about people from the outside coming in. This is a very important topic for me as I see this all play out, because we're supposed to believe that this is just an organic protest, that all of this violence erupted and has grown out of an organic protest, genuine concern over a black man being murdered by a white cop, and the injustices that are associated with that. And that is wrong, and I'm not minimizing that. But this is not an organic protest, and these are not organic protesters or the rioters. This didn't grow out of something organic, as evidenced by the fact that you got people apparently being bussed in.
We do have a viewer who tweeted to say she wanted us to talk a little bit about organized protesters being here, which is interesting because I do know that I think it was Chief Arredondo said that there are people that they recognize not to be from Minnesota here in Minnesota.
Chief Axtell.
Axel did too, but Arredondo
Yeah, you
did
know,
too.
and it's a really difficult thing to quantify. And how do you prove that? I've seen the same thing. I've heard the same thing from many of our viewers that there are people coming into Minnesota and causing all of this trouble. There is certainly several different groups of protesters, and the largest one is the number of Minnesotans who are genuinely upset and concerned about what happened, not just to the tragic death of George Floyd, but the constant years of problems with people of color and communities of color. And you've got those protesters, and then you've got people who are out there who are just out there as spectators, trying to go along and have a good time tonight. But there may be a smaller group of protesters who are actually trying to start violence, going from place to place to place. But we don't have any quantitative evidence from the police to say, we've arrested this person and they're from a different state and this is why they were here. We just don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
That's our gut, but we don't know.
I think the police have said that. And as we go along here, we'll get to some more of that. But there's no question to me that this is going on. They talked about, too, one of the things that burned was a library on fire. They were burning a library in Minneapolis. So why would you do that? I mean, we talk about, you could say, well, it's the mob mentality and they're just looking for things to destroy. Okay, everybody has been making the point, including myself and my wife and, everybody who's observing this. How does it make any sense to burn your own community? How does it make any sense to destroy everything when you're going to need, somebody said, you got to live there. You got to live there. And yet you're destroying everything, so you're going to end up having to drive for auto parts. There was an AutoZone that was burned to the ground and looted before it was burned. How does it make any sense to destroy your own neighborhood? And I would assert that if you're from out of town, it doesn't matter if you destroy the neighborhood because you don't have to live there. You don't have to reap the repercussions of these acts to destroy. So I think it's
true.
Very clear to me anyway that is exactly what is going on. And that doesn't mean there's not joiners. There's not people who are joining in and who are from the area. But the initial fires, the initial sparks of this violence that's taking place, as I said, this is too sophisticated, Vicky. Too sophisticated, and for it all to. It's very hard to get people to show up at a protest, generally speaking. And for this to be,
you're right about that. It is, and the only group of organized protesters that I ever knew of, they were affiliated with the unions. The unions would provide buses to bring protesters in, and so I don't know if the unions are involved in this or not, but they might be. But I have to believe that the police and the FBI, they know who they are.
Yeah.
I have to believe that. That's their job to know who they are.
Well, and maybe they do. I mean, there are things that could very well be classified that they're not talking about, because I would like to believe that they're going after some of these. I would like to believe that there's real law enforcement taking place on the ground, or at least an attempt at enforcing things. Certainly that's what the noises that are coming out of these officials' mouths are saying. The question is how, to what degree, and what do they know, and what are they not able to say? Anyway, continuing here.
I know I also got a tweet from Blake who says that the Hennepin County Library is burning at Lake and 28th. And
okay, that was the library on fire I was just talking about.
He has we don't have that picture yet, but...
Again, that speaks to what we're talking about, where we have these libraries in modest income neighborhoods, and now what? You're not going to have a library there for how
these
long?
Kids
Year,
and these
2
families,
years?
Yeah.
So what does that say to the kids? Educational opportunities. So there's
so many long-lasting implications. Yeah.
Yeah, that cascade over a long period of time, based on violence of knuckleheads who are out there doing damage to property.
Okay, so they go on to talk about where ultimately, and this is the thing that I can see coming onto the horizon, Vicky, because as
I have to comment.
Sure.
I don't like the way he minimized who those people are. They are not knuckleheads. They're arsonists. They're criminals. They are not knuckleheads.
Yeah, I agree. He kind of did gloss over that, didn't he?
Yeah.
I would say they're domestic terrorists. This is really the very definition. According to the domestic terrorist law, because domestic terrorism is defined very clearly in law as actions of violence that are committed against, in order to influence public policy, in order to influence governments, in order to influence individuals, to coerce. The coerce is the word they use.
Yeah, well, and it does. You're right. It does fit that.
It fits the definition. So what these media people should be saying is they should be calling them domestic terrorists, because under law, they are domestic terrorists. And I have to say one more thing about that, too. There are people now that are trying to equate what we did at the Capitol, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I don't know, where you had, I think it was April 30th, was the protest at the Capitol, where we, and all of this is on Periscope, periscope.tv/governamerica. That's where you can find the video. The whole big long thing is, I think it was like over a 4-hour video, which culminated in us going inside the Capitol. The people there were yelling, "Let us in!" at the door to the chamber of the House of Representatives here in the state of Michigan. Let us in! Let us in! Let us in! And there were some people, a few, that were open carrying. There were a few who had long rifles who were in there. And then ultimately some of them got into the Senate chamber, and these legislators claimed that they were being intimidated. They were being threatened. Nobody, to my knowledge, ever threatened anybody. They had their guns, but they were peaceful. There was nothing that was burned. Nothing that there were no words. There might have been words exchanged, but there were no threatening. There were no actual threats made. Certainly, no windows were broken. Nothing. In fact, the only violence that took place was the day before, when the Capitol security roughed up some women, trying to throw them out of the Capitol. And since then, a lawsuit has been filed. So that's the case, and even that one of the lawmakers that came out said that we played his audio on the show, O'Malley, Jack O'Malley. He came out and said that the lawn of the Capitol was clean when everybody left. He says they didn't leave any garbage behind. They just made a lot of noise and then they left. Okay, but I came home from that event, took a nap because I was tired. It had been a long day, and I got up a couple hours later and I look at Twitter and hashtag Michigan terrorists was I think the number one trending thing on Twitter.
Yeah,
and this meme has been pushed forth.
For so long, everything in the media has been reported as the opposite of what it is. Whatever it is, they report the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think that's a strategy to discombobulate people, disorient people, because it conflicts with what they see with their own eyes and what they think in their own minds, regardless of which side they're on. You know, if you see an event, you see what it is, and if there is no violence, then there are not violent protesters.
Well, I just see this meme being pushed forward, and they use the phrase like protesters stormed the Capitol. There was no storming going on. We entered the Capitol, but the doors were open. There was a line of state police there, who the only request they made was, can you leave your signs out here in the vestibule? You know, there's a little entranceway there, and they asked people to leave their signage there, and so people left their signs and whatever else they had there. But you know, and the cops didn't even ask. It was the state police. They didn't even ask people to leave their guns there. I mean, it seems to me like if they had a problem with guns in the Capitol, they wouldn't have allowed them in the first place because people very openly had them. The cops didn't have a problem with that. The only thing they did request is aside from the signage being left there, is that they could take our temperature. So they took our temperature. They pointed a temperature gun at our heads, and after that they said, okay, you're all set. You know, and then we entered. If we were storming the Capitol, it seems to me like the state police would have stopped us and tried to arrest people. None of that ever happened. So this notion that somehow the April 30th Michigan protest, which was a real protest and it was a peaceful event, was somehow somehow similar to what is happening in Minneapolis, Washington D.C., the list of cities, Ohio, the list of cities and states is as long as your arm. Somehow, with these violent protests, is just nothing short of a lie. It's nothing short of a complete lie. But they talk about where and I think where all of this is going, Vicky, as our cities are burning, everything's going up in smoke, businesses are looted, and civil unrest, very much like we've predicted for years. Hate to be right again, but here we are. Civil unrest has broken out all across the country, and what's next? Could it be martial law? Are they going to? I would argue that martial law is not necessary. Actually, the Constitution provides for the Congress. In fact, Article 1, Section 8, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. So they can use the military in conjunction with the Constitution, pursuant to the Constitution. They have the ability to call forth the military to stop this stuff. And you could go back to the argument, why hasn't this been done yet? But anyway, they talk. WCCO is talking about martial law.
Earlier in the evening, military police are available. And then about half an hour ago, we got this information. Not only are they available, military police ready to deploy within 4 hours if needed. And, Pat, even though they're military police, I still think they're under civilian purview, right? I mean, there's certainly a difference between calling the National Guard. The National Guard reports to civilian leaders. The military reports to civilian leaders. I mean, I don't think anyone's saying we need martial law, which is completely different when the military is in control.
in extreme cases, the state of Minnesota could declare martial law, but that's not what we're talking about here. But these are members of the military. These are not the part-time soldiers, any of that. These are military police who are on duty in military installations around the United States that President Trump and the Pentagon, and this is a very rare move, has ordered to be activated and ready to go if needed. That's quite a statement from the president, who is said to be, according to people I'm talking with tonight, who is said to be monitoring this situation very closely.
I don't know if you have any comments on that, but
yeah, I do. I'm not sure that I agree with them that martial law is not necessary, because it goes back to what I said before, where where the police and military that go in there can't be 100% certain that the civilian leadership in that state are actually friendlies, or if they are embedded in with the enemy. I mean, it's because it's Minnesota, and because of everything about Minnesota at this point in time, I don't think that the police and military that would go in to help in Minnesota could consider them as a normal American city. There, I said it. So,
well, I would just, I first of all, I think it was me that said that martial law is not necessary. And what I meant by that is that they can still call forth the military. The problem with martial law is, as he pointed out there, it's military rule. At that point,
well, it's
you're dealing
military,
with
military engagement, and that's my point. That's my point about the civilian leadership in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Because the people, even the Attorney General, is, as we've already talked about,
a terrorist.
he is, yes, he's endorsing, certainly on the side of terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
What else would you say about it? When he puts out a tweet, which has since been deleted, by the way, surprise, surprise, but he puts out a tweet, supporting the Antifa playbook. And Antifa is a terrorist group. All right, I'll tell you what. I've got Dan in Kentucky on the line. He's been holding for a little bit, so I want to go ahead and get to him. And after we talk to Dan, I want to get into this press conference that was held in the wee hours of the morning last night, because they had some very important information dealing with these organizations and how sophisticated they are. I really believe we are facing an orchestrated terrorist plot, but it's a militaristic type of organization that's going on here, that's coordinating all this stuff. Anyway, Dan in Kentucky, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, great show, you all, as always. The spies in the sky could easily track and see which out of staters are coming into those make those protests and riots, just like they did in Ferguson. A lot of it's the same as in Ferguson, Missouri, because when they burn out all those local businesses, the real estate developers will have a field day with new projects. And you said, Vicky, that one cop is connected with real estate, maybe? So there you go. It would also be easy for the police to jam texting and phone communications. They do it when necessary and when they want to.
Well, yeah, Dan, let me just build upon that point right there, because I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, somebody on Twitter mentioned that to me as well. They could cut off cell phone communications, and these people would run like, I forget exactly the word they use, but they are obviously organizing and receiving their instructions. So it seems to me like that would be the logical thing to do. As much as I hate having communications, my whole existence is communications. That's my livelihood, and I'm all about information, getting it out, but also taking it in. I love I love being able to communicate and receive communications. That being said, in a situation like this where you're building, your entire city is burning, and you know these people that are doing this are getting intel and getting instructions from somewhere, it seems to me like, the first rule of military and war is to cut off the supply lines. Okay?
Yeah.
In this case, the supply lines are the supply of information that's going out to the people who are receiving their marching orders. It seems to me like, and you wouldn't have to jam anything. All they have to do is go to the cell phone providers and say, look, we've got an emergency here. We need, more than likely, the cell phone providers will willingly shut the thing down if the cops would request it. That just seems logical to me. But anyway, go ahead, please.
Okay, so this is an agenda. It's not logical. And what you all were saying about things don't make sense, my dad was really smart. He went from Normandy to almost Berlin, and I pulled him back, and they lost a lot of casualties the last 2 weeks of the war. He always said, everything important makes sense, figure out how. So there's communist moles in this. It's a setup. It's just like Ferguson, and one thing like burning the library, you said, doesn't make sense. Well, it does in this way, because in the Armenian genocide in 1915, about which nobody has really had any consequences, the Armenian philosopher Gurdjieff said his father, who was a poet, and he knew the Gilgamesh epic from ancient Babylonia before they discovered the clay tablets. So these ancient peoples, especially in the Middle East, had oral history, and the Young Turks destroyed it. They changed their alphabet. Well, they want to get rid of Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville. They want to burn down a library. They want real estate development. And Darren, when you said about things being not organic, nothing in communism is organic. When Lenin took over in the revolution at 2:04 in the morning, November 8th, 1917, not a shot was fired except for some show at the palace. Not a shot was fired, like you were talking about Cossack's book.
Uh-huh.
You're talking about things that I've spent my life studying about cultures and how they're different and how they're manipulated.
Good.
We talk to people all over the world, and nobody except Americans believe the government and the country are the same things. Only Americans do. The reason they do is because they combine the Anglo-Saxon vice of hypocrisy, that's a quote from Voltaire, with the American vice of naivete. You put hypocrisy and naivete together, you have a unique American flavor where people think their government and the country are the same. So you have these communists, like torturing Pavlov's dog, putting out all these memes that are illogical, going one way and another, and Pavlov shocked the dog so it couldn't move anywhere in the cage without being shocked. That's what's going on with all of this. Now, I've studied Islamic history, had a minor in it, and in 1730, and the link is on henrymacau.com, there was a British agent who was trained. His name was Hempher, James Hempher, Hempher. He started Wahhabism. He got some dumb, crazy, arrogant couple Muslims, and he started Wahhabism. And the reason Iran is so much better than Saudi Arabia is Iran is a nation. It was an empire. Cyrus the Great started the post office back in 600 BC. Saudi Arabia is a tribe. And not only that, in Islamic law, the Hashemite tribe is supposed to control Mecca and Medina. Well, the British came in there with Lawrence, who was a shill, and no wonder he killed himself in the end. And he was homosexual and all kinds of perverted things, and a traitor. And he came in there and put the Saudi family in charge. Well, guess what? The Saudi family are these Wahhabi descendants that Hemfer started in 1730. So it was a setup. So you're dealing with a tribe versus an ancient nation and empire, and the Shia and Sunni thing. There's extremists in both cases, just like in Christians there's extreme cases. You know, Christians don't know anything about Islam, and Jesus is mentioned more in the Quran than he is in the Bible. They have a great respect for Mary and Jesus. And
all right, hey, I got to take this break here. Hold your thoughts. We'll be back after the top of the hour break. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the third and final hour of Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It continues to be the 30th of May, 2020, as we are talking about the state of our nation right now with the ongoing riots that are taking place by domestic terrorists all across our country. And for what purpose? And where is ultimately where is it all headed? We have Dan in Kentucky on the line, and I want to go ahead and finish up with Dan. Dan, I appreciate you calling in and giving us that information, kind of a historical perspective on Wahhabism. I don't know if you finished all that. Did you?
So,
go ahead.
How insidious what this was. The British raised children with the complete background of Turkey, Iran, China, India, different places. They had teachers of that language. They learned that language. Then when they sent their spies in, they would confirm with a child who didn't know he was English. You know, they had them isolated in separate places in England. And so they would check to see how the spies would work back and forth. And so they ran this whole gamut like that from the 1730s as this one memoir. But the point is that we're opposed to Iran because of Israel. Israel did
that is true.
In their nuclear system. They also, according to Stone, did Fukushima with Stuxnet with the cameras and equipment not knowing it was going off. But they got the same thing planned for us. And that's what's going on. Nothing communist is natural, and people need to look at their words like they're not knuckleheads, like he said. You know, we are dealing with terrorists, and people are standing up. We've got a friend here whose son-in-law is a cop, and he's dealing with these riots down here in Louisville. And told them, I said, you need to use one rule to trump another. If we do X, we can't accomplish goal Y, and that's important. So psychopaths are routinized, and they think in certain patterns, so when they give you orders that are illogical and don't make sense, look for what's behind it, and you can bring up that they have to do what you want to instead of what they want to, and then they have to go back to the drawing board because they are not smart enough when they're thrown out of their system of thinking. So it's really sad. The psychological test, the MMPI that they used to use for personality, and they still use it, is based on Minnesota and Minneapolis. And that shows the average American temperament. Well, this shows how socialist and leftist people have become. And if you all were Antifa, then you would have been allowed to storm the Capitol, Darren.
Yeah.
But you weren't. But patriots never do that. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the call. Very, very good words from Dan in Kentucky. Yeah, and he makes a lot of sense, and that's really what we need in this day and age. People, we're trying, as we try to find logic in all of this, Vicky.
Yeah, well, and he's right, because there is a logic to any situation. You know, you have to apply logic to how you're going to deal with it, and if what you're being told to do doesn't follow a logical path and you don't get a satisfactory explanation, you know, because there's always a possibility that there are things that you don't know about.
Oh, there's definitely things we don't know about this.
But I'm talking about the police, because they're the ones that are putting their lives on the line. If they don't question things that are illogical, then they may lose their lives, because you don't know who is a friendly and who is a foe.
Yeah, and you don't know really if those that are commanding you are friend or foe, and that's the problem. We have multiple layers. Okay, I want to jump to this Minnesota Emergency Operations Center press conference, because there's some very important information, I think, that came out of that thing. And this, like I say, this was held last night. It was actually early this morning, probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, I would say Eastern time, 2:30 in the morning. It might have been, actually, I think it was scheduled to start at 1:30, so it would have been 2:30 Eastern time. Anyway, it was late. Okay, and the governor was there. They had the mayor of Minneapolis there, who I think this guy is completely. My impressions of him, and I haven't followed him closely until this all began, is really the first time I've really paid attention to this guy. But he seems completely clueless. I'm not very impressed with him.
I hope it's the clip that I listened to this morning, because my reaction to it was, what a moron. He sounds like
I was trying to be polite.
Talking to a 10-year-old bad boy.
I don't know how this guy got elected. How did this guy get elected? Because I just don't see that anyway, I won't get on a rampage.
People that loot and burn do not have the kind of moral foundation or conscience that you can appeal to to get them to stop.
And he was appealing again. Anyway.
See, that's the kind of illogic that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know.
This is Governor Tim Walz talking about why it appears that there was a lackluster police response. He's saying that there's basically the police department, their entire force was overwhelmed.
This is the largest civilian deployment in Minnesota history that we have out there today. And quite candidly, right now, we do not have the numbers. We cannot arrest people when we're trying to hold ground because of the sheer size, the dynamics, and the wanton violence that's coming out there. Colonel Langer spoke about this often, of seasoned folks who have also deployed overseas and seen this, and now seeing this here in our neighborhoods. We will talk about ways and the resources that we have left, but to put this into perspective, the force that we have out there now is about 3 times larger than the one in the 60s, which was the largest during the race riots. And they're out there right now. And the capacity to be able to do offensive actions, and they're out there doing that, arresting the folks that we can. But as you've seen, there's already shots being fired back at our people. This arson that is taking place puts many people at risk. Our firefighters are specifically and very open to target, and Minneapolis Fire has been responding heroically. And I tell you, all the citizens, the response time is fast as we want to get it. And that responsibility, as I said today, for coordination lies with us. I will take responsibility for the underestimating the wanton destruction and the size of this crowd. We have deployed a force that I think, as we sat down together and talked about, would have in any other civilian military or civilian police operation worked. But the terrifying thing is to hear people who've seen this, and myself of looking at this, it resembles more of a military operation at times now, as especially ringleaders moving from place to place.
Ringleaders moving from place to place. Vicky?
And military operation.
Yes,
that says right there that you need martial law and you need to send the military in. And they need to just start. They need to warn the crowd, the military is coming in here, and the military is not the local police. They're just going to start shooting you bastards. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. You can say bastards. The thing is that, and Trump took a lot of heat for tweeting that out, that, when the looting starts, so does the shooting. The shooting starts when the looting starts. Something to that effect, anyway. And I tweeted back at him, is this the official rules of engagement? I just wondering if this is really the official rules of engagement. But it doesn't sound helpful or presidential to say something like that. And Trump is kind of a lightning rod, and I think he kind of likes it that way. But when you think about it, if somebody's coming to your business, how would you defend it? If somebody's coming through your door to do you harm, to rape your family, to steal your stuff, to even to harm you and your family and your property, what are you going to do? You're going to stop that person and use deadly force if you have to, and thankfully, in most places, if they come into your house, it's still legal to do so. Whether or not that changes in the future, anymore, you don't have any rights hardly. But the issue is that it's not unreasonable for people who are committing these types of crimes, where they're looting and destroying cities. It's not unreasonable to take the necessary action to stop them. They are criminals. And I've said before, Vicky, about the people that have been coming into our country. If you want to stop them from coming into our country, and I'm talking about the illegals now, that were flooding in droves, in caravans that were being organized and paid for by billionaires to destroy our country, I've said, you start shooting them at the border, they'll stop, because the word will spread real fast. That they are basically an invading army of people that are coming here, being organized to come here to destroy. And the Constitution specifically says, I just read it a moment ago, that they have the power to call forth, it should be the Congress, the power to call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. That's constitutional. That is a constitutional use of our military. That is exactly what you want to do. You have to enforce the law. You cannot let this type of violence go unchecked, where police stations are being burned. They're being taken over by thugs, by outlaws, by terrorists, and you just thumb your nose at it and say, well, life was too important, which is what the idiotic mayor said. Life is more important than this symbolism of a building.
Huh.
That's what he said.
Yeah, well, people that are willing to burn down a building are also willing to put a bullet in your head, Mayor. And so,
So
He's
these
just
terrorists,
an idiot. That's all.
Yeah, these terrorists are willing to put bullets in people's heads, and in fact, they have been shooting. They have been shooting at the cops. They have been, there are many rounds that have been fired off. So anyway, continuing with this press conference, this is John Harrington. He's the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. He's describing the size of the force they put together and how it turned out to be inferior to the mob that they were facing on the ground.
Yesterday, we put together a unified command structure and a unified command, bringing together Minneapolis Police Department, St. Paul Police Department, Hennepin County, Ramsey County Sheriff's Departments, Minnesota State Patrol, DNR, and General Jensen's men and women of the Minnesota National Guard. We created a plan that brought together one of the largest civil police forces that we have ever seen in the state of Minnesota, larger, frankly, than we had for the Republican National Convention even, with well in excess of 2,500 officers total committed to the effort of keeping the peace. We had a very clear mission. The governor was crystal clear, and the mayors have been crystal clear that our mission was to keep the peace, to maintain order, and to stop lawless behavior. By 8 o'clock last night, we began to see that we were going to have to operate on multiple different fronts of criminal behavior, with reports from St. Paul that they were actively engaged, reports that we had individuals that were breaching the Minnesota freeways around 35W, that we had crowds of in excess of 2,000 in the Lake Street area east of Hiawatha, crowds of hundreds in the area of Nicollet and Lake Street, and crowds of 1,000 or more in downtown. We reassessed the assets that we had, the personnel that we had, and redeployed to try and be as many of those as we could be at. But we recognize that we simply did not, even with the numbers that I'm talking about, have enough officers and personnel to meet all of those missions safely and successfully. We picked missions based on our capacity, and those missions focused on downtown off of Nicollet, and also focused on the 5th Precinct area of Nicollet and Lake. We continue to hold our critical infrastructures around other places that we believed through good intel that were being targeted and would have been destroyed, and we have continued to hold those places of critical infrastructure even as we speak. At the Nicollet and Lake area, our mobile field forces were able to rally around that area. They were able to disperse a crowd and make what I'm told is in the neighborhood of about 50 arrests. We have a mobile field force of in excess of 300, larger than the mobile field force that we utilized last night to clear the Hiawatha and East Lake Street area, and they have been actively engaged. But the level of resistance that we have seen tonight has increased exponentially. We have had officers shot at. We have had what looks to be like improvised munitions that have been targeted toward the officers. We have had officers injured. And we are continuing.
So I want to stop it right there for just a second. He's describing a war zone. What he's describing here, Vicky, is a war zone. He's saying that their officers have encountered improvised explosive munitions.
Yeah.
This is improvised explosives. You hear about them in war zones. And here they have come to the streets of America. And I would say,
and you can't treat a situation like that as just a normal domestic
unrest,
policing operation. You just really can't.
Yeah, and you see these fires that are. You know what? I have a hard time sometimes when I'm going out to burn some cardboard, getting the cardboard to start. You know, I mean, obviously, if you dump gasoline on it, it's easier. But I mean, the fires that start they are so incredibly huge, and they are burning so incredibly fast from nothing, and just minutes later, a whole building is engulfed. I mean, I don't know how you get that without some professional. I mean, it seems like these people are really professionals at what they're doing here.
Like they're soldiers.
Yes, like it's a professional operation. Absolutely.
Well, we always said, that the refugees that they're bringing into this country, they're not refugees. They're military-age men. And they may be economic refugees where they can't get a job in their own town or their own country, but that's not the same thing as a refugee, from hurricane or drought or whatever, your typical refugee. So they've distorted the definition of refugee to include people who could be soldiers from another country and calling them refugees.
Well, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying they're refugees. I don't know who these people are.
No, I was just saying that because Minneapolis is absolutely loaded with people from African countries. Imported Somalis, primarily, I think. But and they came in as refugees.
Well, that's the thing, is that we've the officials who have been controlling public policy in our country have long allowed so many foreigners to come in here from very questionable parts of the world that one would have to ask how many of these people potentially are being utilized to flip America, to flip our country. So I think it's fair to say, without any doubt, we are under attack right now. This is a war.
And how do you take over without a shot fired? You just bring in lots of people and overwhelm the domestic society. And that's what the State Department has been doing.
Yes.
In our country, they have been overwhelming American communities, especially in more rural areas. They've just, been overwhelming our population with massive foreign invasion, either legally or illegally.
Yes. But what I hear this police commissioner saying is that shots were fired. In this case, they're being fired against his officers, and Molotov cocktails, in other words, improvised explosive devices. All of this stuff is going on right now. We are under attack. This is a multi-theater war that's taking place against our country, even as we speak.
But the level of resistance that we have seen tonight...
Okay, backing it up just a little bit. Again, he was talking about the stuff that they did to organize. They organized this massive force, and then they ended up finding out that it was inadequate too.
But the level of resistance that we have seen tonight has increased exponentially. We have had officers shot at. We have had what looks to be like improvised munitions that have been targeted toward the officers. We have had officers injured. And we are continuing to push that crowd on east of Hiawatha with the attempt to try and do what we did last night, which was to move them off of the streets and to restore order there. But we recognize that as we do that, continuing to hold the area at Nicollet Lake and try and maintain order in downtown, that we will need far more officers and far more National Guard resources than we currently have. We have created a request for the National Guard to substantially increase the number of National Guard officers that would be available. And we have reassessed our strategy in terms of our ability to mobilize mobile field forces that have been effective in moving against what is now an armed and more entrenched group of protesters, and what I would really operate and say more that they are an entrenched group of rioters. We have had officers that have been injured, none seriously at this point, but we have not given up our efforts to try and clear those streets. We will not give up our efforts to clear those streets. We are committed to restoring order in Minneapolis, helping St. Paul maintain order, and we're getting ready for what will be one of the largest crowds that we have ever heard, and that we recognize that we will be at the center of a not just statewide event, not just a national event, but what is now looking to be like an international event tomorrow in that same area that we're holding right now in the area around Nicollet and Lake.
Okay, so when he says tomorrow, what he's talking about really is today, because as I said, that was held just hours ago in the middle of the night from the Emergency Command Operations Center there in the state of Minnesota. And I hate to focus all of our attention on Minnesota, because I know that there are things in other states, in other cities around the country. In fact, I've got, and by the way, well, I'll say that in a minute. Somebody's telling me that our website is under attack. I went there. The website is up. I don't know why they're getting an error message. But one of our truck driver friends who listens to the show got a message from his Brave browser that claims that attackers might be trying to steal your information from governamerica.com. Rest assured, folks, governamerica.com is not trying to steal your information. It's my website. I would not do that. And it's not been hacked. There's nothing here, no indication I have anywhere that I do know that they're trying. They've been trying. The Chinese lately have been trying. I just blocked a bunch of IP addresses from China. They're hammering the website, and they're trying to break in for some reason. I don't know why they would do that, but that is going on right now.
I had a problem like that on my website. I had an article about the BLM. And every day for, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 weeks, my website would just get slammed with these Chinese posts in Chinese. And so I had to start blocking IP addresses. Finally, I gave up and blocked out the comments area so they couldn't comment it. But my website was just getting hammered with emails in Chinese, which I thought was really bizarre because the article's about the BLM. So, And by the way, just as a side note,
before I forget to mention it and kick myself for forgetting to mention it, the hearing was held today with regard to the Bundys. They're trying to appeal that whole exoneration, that whole acquittal, based upon
I don't know how they can do that because she dismissed it with prejudice.
Right, exactly. And they're coming back and appealing it. So I don't know how they can do it either, and I don't know how this doesn't violate double jeopardy.
Well, you know what? Well, it'd be triple jeopardy. They already, I don't know, this might be quadruple jeopardy. But you know what? Donald Trump said something interesting. There was something interesting about Donald Trump getting international authority for something he was going to do domestically. That was disturbing to me. And that was this morning. I didn't have time to go chase that down.
Yeah.
But if we take all of these things, kind of these clues of, this happening here, there, and everywhere, it kind of adds up to like who's in control of our country, what law are we operating under?
Well, the law of Soros, apparently. By the way, we were talking about this Ellison guy, who is an Antifa supporting Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota. This Keith Ellison was an Antifa supporting person. The Soros family donated $100,000 to Ellison's Attorney General Political Action Committee. Just file that in the back of your mind. That according to Alpha News. I got an article here which will be in the show notes, along with everything else that we talked about, to the point that we can put it in the show notes. It will be there. There's some things I get there I don't have a link for because I recorded it off of a live stream or stuff, like a lot of this stuff, like this press conference, for instance. I might be able to find a link to it. I will try, but this was recorded off of a live stream in the middle of the night. So anyway, so with regard to the website, I would just say, I just went there. It's coming up fine for me. I don't know what the deal is with why he's getting that error message. But, we'll try to investigate it and figure out why that's happening. Very disturbing. But anyway, moving along here. But he said there's 2,500 officers, Vicky. 2,500 officers, and it wasn't enough. And then the National Guard rolls in. Now, there was a question from a reporter, and again, where is all the National Guard? Because this is what people are wanting to ask. This is what people see. They don't see the police presence. They don't see National Guard anywhere.
Governor, for the second night in a row, hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of Minnesotans and Americans are watching on television as fires burn, buildings are looted, people of Minneapolis in danger, and they don't see the National Guard. They don't see law enforcement. I know you say they're out there, but people are not seeing them, and they're not hearing from their leaders, and it goes on for hours and hours, and nobody knows what is going on. What can you tell me? Are people just missing it on television? Are we missing?
There's simply more of them than us, and the operation is so much broader. We are out there, I can assure you. They are in heated confrontations that are putting folks at risk. We are prioritizing those critical assets, and I know the heartbreak that brings to people when the business that you fought your life for to try and get burns down. That seems like a pretty damn critical asset to you. We're protecting the Federal Reserve. We're protecting those infrastructures downtown. We're protecting power stations and things like that. But they're out there. And as I said, this is the largest single deployment in the state's history. This is certainly not a group that slacks off. These are the best trained in the country. They are war-hardened, and they have been out there on many times as far as National Guard and the police that are out there and the firefighters. It's simply that broad. And we have to prioritize. We have to triage. It is a horrible predicament. I can tell you this, Tom. I want every one of those fires put out immediately. I wished it would not happen. We're trying to use all the tools that we had. Fact of the matter is on this, we ask people, we put a stay-at-home order in, and they don't give one damn about that. And they are out there now to cause as much damage as they can. Our goal is to create the plan that stops that the best we can, to assess, and in this case, assess and bring on those troops.
Oh. What a lame, weak piece of... He should resign immediately. We're just doing the best we can.
Yeah, I don't know what to believe at this point. I got people ripping on me in the chat room for purportedly making excuses for not resisting tyranny. And I'm not quite sure what's going on here. But I'm not making excuses for anybody, people. The problem, I'm not sure what this person is advocating. I would like them to call in. Call in, 610-600-1776. This is why we have a phone line for you to call in on. Or toll free. We'll even pay for the call. 844-646-8376. If you want to talk to me in person. Tell me what you think. I would love to hear what you're saying. Because I'm not making excuses for anybody. But if you're talking about going up against government, I think that is exactly ultimately where they're going to steer the martial law. Because, and I think my concern is they're going to use these events to suspend the Constitution in accordance with, Rex 84 and all the plans that were being put into place that were being revealed back in the 1980s when the Oliver North testimony was taking place during the Iran-Contra hearings. They had the plan to suspend the Constitution. North was the one that helped put that plan in place, by the way.
I'm not convinced that we're not already under that and that isn't the source of the tyranny.
Could very well be.
The problem with a plan like that is that it's great when it's a government that agrees with you is in place, but when the opposition party takes over, or when you get a terrorist in the White House, it's not so great.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what they're saying here, because I just say call in and let's talk about it. I'm not going to attack you. I'm polite to callers, unless they really give me a reason not to be. But
I'll be nice too.
Well, we may disagree on something, but I would love to be able to have a discussion. 610-600-1776 or toll free 844-646-8376. In the meantime, there was a question about outside groups coming into the area to cause problems. That came up again during the question and answer session.
We're hearing reports that it's not only the criminal element that was here the last couple of nights, but now some white supremacists have come to Minnesota and are causing some of the destruction. Can you address, are there white supremacists causing destruction in the city?
Yeah, well, the unconfirmed reports, and again, we're trying to get that, but we've got intel from all the different agencies. Of course, this is where the federal government helps us with some of this. I certainly can't confirm personally on this. My suspicions and what I've seen on this, yes. It gets worse than that. The cartels, who are wondering that was a break in their drug transmissions, are trying to take advantage of the chaos that's there too. That's why this situation is on a federal level. You're seeing it highly coordinated across the country, so that will happen. And I think this is the conversation we're having with the president, that we're having together here, to be very clear with Minnesotans in the dangerous situation of those who are going to legitimately grieve George Floyd's death are going to gather here. It is a highly volatile situation, and these folks who want to do this blend in, and when you look at those pictures as you see at night, it looks like they're just strolling and 8 o'clock's coming and we'll see if they go home. They didn't come to stroll. They didn't come to go home. They came, and I think asking where the guard is, how they're responding, think about a rule of engagement in a civilized society where these people have no rules. Their one goal is that destruction, or to hurt or to entice those folks to come in, and our folks are the professionals that is not our intention. Our intention is to restore order. We want them to do nothing more than go home. We don't want them arrested. We don't want to try and have violence on the streets, but that's who they are. So I don't know if John can speak any more on unconfirmed reports, but I think it's very clear by now when you have a situation like this across the country, elements that want to do that are certainly gathering. And then they are professionals on some of the, like John said, we're seeing evidence of pretty sophisticated attempt to cause problems.
They are professionals. They are sophisticated.
Well, that says war. That says war.
That tells me that there's a machinery behind this. And look, here's the thing. I don't want to see martial law take place. Some of the comments that people, the purple pill in the chat room is making, is that, go ahead and let them martial law us. I said I don't think martial law is the way to deal with this problem. But you can't let cities continue to burn. I'm not arguing for martial law, because martial law would equate to a suspension of the Constitution. I would argue that that's exactly where they want to go with this thing.
You can't turn the military loose in a city without martial law. You can't do it because
this whole thing
you can't do it because of posse-comitatus. But But
where's
you
Congress?
can't send in a military force and have them with blindfolds and one arm tied behind their back. If they're going in to stop the rioting and burning and looting, and the people that they're up against are professional paramilitary people, you better let them go in and do their thing.
Well, this whole paradigm is being engineered so that we have this debate, and so that what comes to my mind, Vicky, is are the words of Henry Kissinger after he was quoted by a French, I believe it was one of the people in France. They were having a Bilderberg meeting. I could call up the quote. In fact, maybe I should instead of trying to remember it. He said, "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order." This was in 1991 that he said this. Tomorrow, he says, they will be grateful. This is especially true if there were an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then all the peoples of the world will pledge with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing that every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished, with the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government.
Yeah, the minute I see a blue helmet, I don't care who's on the other side without the blue helmet, I'm on the side without the blue helmet.
Well, I don't think they're going to have blue helmets. They've done away with the blue helmets in favor of NATO-style tactics, which, they're still put under
not
the
foreign UN, it's NATO.
Well,
and if
same
it's
thing.
NATO, then
same
then
thing.
It would be our country attacking us, because our country is a member of NATO.
Well, NATO is essentially, in my opinion, the same thing as the UN. I mean, if you read its charter, it basically is, its whole purpose is to back up what United Nations is all about. The point is, though, is that regardless of what it's called, I mean, there is a very real danger here that what happens as things continue to devolve into chaos is that foreign troops could be called in.
Trump better not ever do that. If Trump ever does that,
29.
Then
I don't know if the 29 Palms survey. There used to be a website dedicated to it, but people can type in 29 Palms survey, and it should come up. Yes. In fact, it is there. The website that had it on there is still up. 29 Palms, and the number is the number 29. If you type in 29palmsurvey.com, this will take you to a website which describes the questionnaire that was gathering data concerning the attitudes of combat-trained personnel with regard to non-traditional missions. Now, this was an actual survey that was passed out. Lieutenant Command Ernest Guy Cunningham gave it on May 10th, 1994, at the 29 Palms Naval Base in California. And basically, among other things in this survey, they were asking the people there, would you fire upon Americans if you were called to do so? It asks basic questions like what part of service are you in, what's your pay grade, blah blah blah. And then part 2 says, do you feel that U.S. combat troops should be used within the United States for any of the following reasons? And they have drug enforcement, and the options are all for every one of these questions: strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree, or no opinion. So you pick one of those in answer to the question. So what circumstances, if any, do you think U.S. combat troops should be used within the United States? And they have drug enforcement, disaster relief, security at – these are all questions. Each one of our individual questions. Security at national events. And, again, each one has the option from a scale of strongly disagree to strongly disagree or no opinion. Environmental disaster cleanup is question 11. Question 12 is substitute teachers in public schools. I mean, think about that. Having military people teaching in a substitute teacher role officially. Number 13, community assistance programs like landscaping, environmental cleanup, road repair, animal control. Number 14, federal and state prison guards. Number 15, national security police force. Number 16, advisors to SWAT units, the FBI, or the BATF. Border patrol. Prevention of illegal aliens into U.S. territory. Do you feel that U.S. combat troops under U.S. command should be used in other countries for any of the following United Nations missions? Drug enforcement, disaster relief, environmental cleanup, nation building, peacekeeping, humanitarian relief. Then they get to, do you feel that U.S. combat troops should be used in other countries under command of non-U.S. officers appointed by the United Nations for any of the following missions? And drug enforcement, disaster relief, environmental cleanup, peacekeeping, nation building, humanitarian relief, police action. Then they say, consider the following statements. The U.S. runs a field training exercise. UN combat troops should be allowed to serve in U.S. combat units during these exercises under U.S. command and control. And they have, whether you agree or disagree, the UN runs a field training exercise. U.S. combat troops under U.S. command and control should serve in U.S. combat units during these exercises. So it goes on, but one of the questions in here is whether or not they should be, do you agree, basically getting their views. And I'm trying to find the question, and I'm not finding it quickly.
Was it something like, would you go out and take guns away from Americans? Was that survey?
I believe it was a question about whether or not they would be willing to fire upon. I'm not finding it here.
Yeah. See,
okay, here
what?
it is. Here
I'm
it
not
is.
sure that surveys like that are really useful, because what you would answer sitting in the comfort of your living room, or
well, these were actual soldiers
with nothing going on.
These were soldiers that were at 29 Palms.
Well, I understand that, but still, there's nothing in the country that would warrant any kind of decision. I mean, a soldier would say, no, I wouldn't fire on Americans. But yeah, they would fire on Americans if they were in a dangerous situation in the United States and the situation warranted it.
Okay, question 46 is the question. The U.S. government declares a ban on the possession, sale, transportation, and transfer of all non-sporting firearms. A 30-day amnesty period is permitted for these firearms to be turned over to local authorities. At the end of this period, a number of citizen groups refuse to turn over their firearms. Consider the following statement. I would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. Strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree, and no opinion. So, that's the statement.
Uh-huh. And what did most of them say?
I don't know.
Oh.
The fact that they were asked is the story, yeah. I think.
Well, that was during the time. You said that was what year, 1991?
Yes, I believe so. I've backed out.
Okay.
Let me get
back.
Well,
that was during the time frame.
May 10th, May 10th, 1994.
1994. Okay, but it's still within the time frame when everybody in the world was having a group hug. The Cold War is over. We're all best buddies now. We've got our Chinese communist best buddies and our Russian best buddies, and we're never going to go to war. So what do we need a military for? And so they were in the process of redefining the function of the military to not have very many, to special operations, I guess you would say, to organize them for the new American way of warfare. which is covert activities, I guess, small police actions, system, what Thomas Barnett said, system, we would have two militaries. One would be the Marines, the tough guys. The other would be the system administration force. Okay, the system administration force implies to me that the military is planning on having the infrastructure control systems, surveillance systems, under their control, under military command, globally. Now, I don't know if that changed or not, but that's what I think the plan was. And how were they doing that? Through the transportation routes.
Yeah.
Of course.
System Administration Force. That's an interesting name.
Yeah. Well, that's what you call it in an IT department. You've got sysadmin.
Mm-hmm.
System administration.
Yeah. Getting back to this press conference, I got a few more things from it that I thought were important as I was taking notes last night. Governor Walz, he says our force is larger than anything that's ever been deployed, and he's asserting, and I'm not saying it's true or not true. I don't know. This is what he's saying, and that's what we're doing here is documenting what officials are saying. But he's saying that it simply wasn't enough to counter what they were up against.
We've got intel reports that have been confirmed, but I cannot say that we have confirmed observations of local law enforcement to say that we've seen cells of white supremacists in the area. We got reports of that over the last couple of days that we were tracking in terms of threat to some of the critical infrastructure, threat to the National Guard and others. But I don't have confirmed reports that I can give you at this point. Speaking to the governor's point, we also, from some national sources, also got reports on drug cartels that were directing their resources to restore their drug markets in some of the areas that had been looted and some of the businesses that had been operated by them. We're still trying to work through that, but frankly, that's at best a secondary or tertiary concern as we're trying to deal with right now life and death situations on the street.
So he's saying that there are evidently international drug cartel members. I have heard, and I have not been able to confirm this yet. I just simply haven't had time to run it down. That gang members like the Bloods and the Crips have gotten involved in this as well. So you got basically a what would you call it? A cesspool of different groups mixed together, criminal elements that are coming together, taking advantage of all of this.
Of the government.
What's that?
All enemies of the government who would like to see it fall.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, that you would have gang members of all the gangs, the Crips, the Bloods, the MS-13. I mean, because once lawful government is gone, then they can fight amongst themselves to see who controls which territory.
And it's pretty amazing the degree to which this COVID-19 nonsense plays into this whole thing, Vicky. Because in the past, you could pretty much make an assumption about who was guilty of looting, who was guilty of destroying businesses based upon whether or not they were wearing a mask. Now, very conveniently for somebody, I would say for the terrorists.
Good point.
You can't make that assumption anymore because, hey, they're just out there wearing the mask because they're afraid of catching a COVID-19. You can't point a finger at somebody. So the cops could not arrest somebody on suspicion of something based upon the fact that they're wearing a mask. In the past, you could say that a cop could detain somebody based upon whether or not they're wearing a mask and at least question them on the spot or something, to try to get to the bottom of what's going on. Now
Well,
you
wait a
can't
minute,
do that.
though. Who goes out to riot wearing a mask? I mean, if you're such a lawbreaker that...
Well, it could be curious onlookers. I'm not... That's a reasonable doubt, though, however. You know, they have allowed a reasonable doubt to be put into play very conveniently prior to this whole thing breaking out.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I was going along with that whole concept for a minute, but really...
Well, I mean, it's just a little too convenient in my view, but okay, fine, whatever. This is where we're at. Now, okay, here's more on the scope of the problem they outline.
Part of this is you look at what your numbers are, you look at what you believe the threat profile is, and you look at what you have been able to do in the past. And we underestimated both the numbers and we underestimated the tactics. We had not seen individuals in these crowds fire upon officers. We had seen some shootings, but it had not been directed toward officers, and that changed the dynamics incredibly by making just moving in with a mobile field force far more dangerous and far more fraught. As we began to decide how would we move forward, and we're still moving forward, but we recognize that now we have to worry about are we going to take fire as we continue to try and take back Lake Street.
If I could talk about these numbers too, I think this is really important for Minnesotans, and this is a responsibility that I need to make. The one thing is, I think if you're not involved with these numbers, there's the belief, just bring overwhelming force, just bring everybody there. What are you holding back for? We've got about 650 Minnesota State Patrol across there. When you're operating a force, not all of them can be up at the same time. Some of them have to be sleeping. Some are the ones providing the return. We can use every single, which we are, Minnesota State Trooper, and it dwarfs the numbers that are out there. It is not as if that it is an unlimited number and you're making a bad mistake about not putting everybody in there. There are other operations that have to happen. These people will now, and they will be smart, and everything that's happening, they will move. Once it happens, they will move elsewhere. They will move to the suburbs if they see that happen. So you have to keep that force in there. That's why the consultation with the federal government. That's why the consultation with fellow governors. But now many of them, and even the federal government, are starting to think, how are we going to deploy those assets into other places once they see this unrest? So I think it's important to Minnesotans. It's not for lack of planning. It was not a want and weren't you ready for this? Yes, and we put a force on the ground when I asked them. This is larger than anything that has ever been deployed with the most qualified troops on there, and you're still seeing people say, where are they? Where are they? There is a finite number of folks that can go out there. That's why we have to try. And I think about it with these people. So we just say everything is locked down. If you walk out of your house in the morning, you're going to be there. They will still be there tomorrow night. They do not care. They do not care. And so that's the problem that we're solving. And I would tell Minnesotans on this, with that being the case, and it's a tough one, we have a responsibility to solve it. We have the responsibility to figure this out. That is the next move that we're making with the National Guard. That is the moves that we will start thinking and talking about and have tonight about this plan for tomorrow.
So I have absolutely no confidence in that guy. And if I were living in Minnesota, I'd be looking for some out-of-state relatives to stay with.
Well, the problem is as we've talked about, this thing has popped up all around the country. So if your relatives are in another major city, you're going to be in a world of hurt, even there. That's the difficulty of this whole thing. This thing so far, and this is not a comprehensive list, Houston and Fort Worth, Texas, New York City, Chicago, Illinois, Atlanta, Georgia, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Michigan, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Kansas City, Missouri, Des Moines, Iowa, Vegas, Nevada, Charlotte, North Carolina, San Jose, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Memphis, Tennessee, Columbus, Ohio, Denver, Colorado, Cincinnati, Ohio, Portland, Maine, and Louisville, Kentucky. These are just some of the places that things have erupted.
Well, then Trump better get off his rear end and deploy military.
And I don't want martial law. And here's the thing, folks. Here's the thing. Okay, we read you Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress can call forth the military and leave the Constitution intact. But But one chamber of Congress isn't even meeting. They're not even there. As a matter of fact, there is a power grab going on right now where let me just jump to this real quick. And I see we have a call on the line. Just hang with me for just a second here. Because there has been a rule change in Congress where they're allowing bills to be passed with a handful of legislators there.
Proxy voting.
Yes. Bills could pass. See, there's a reason why we've historically, that you have to have a quorum. Okay? They're supposed to have a quorum under the Constitution to be able to do anything. And there's a reason for that. Now we have, this is a website, justthenews.com. Bills could pass with just 22 lawmakers present out of 435 under new House proxy voting rule. Well, that's a House. The 435 would be the entire Congress. I don't think, certainly the House doesn't pass rules for the Senate. So I'm not quite sure about the details of that. But they say the Democratic-controlled House, their passage of a measure to allow final vote on bills with just 22 members present on Capitol Hill is underscoring the partisan divide about coronavirus safety versus abdicating congressional responsibility. A virtual Congress would be a Congress that is connected to the Internet but disconnected from the American people. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy tweeted Sunday. He continued, he said, Democrats are forever altering American democracy for the worse. Unconstitutional power grab. And I would argue, I would have to point out to Mr. McCarthy again, Americans not a democracy. There are democratic elements, but regardless, this is Kevin McCarthy on the floor of the House as he was, lamenting.
What they're trying to do is another big systems rollout. They're trying to establish the precedent for the virtual Congress, which is that they will vote using the Internet.
Which does what? It shields, just very much like the mail-in votings. Ultimately, where they're, I think, going to take it is Internet voting. It's designed, in my opinion, to remove, the power of the people.
It's
any
a
kind of
takeover.
electoral power.
They are creating the ultimate panopticon using systems of control, computer systems of control. And their cell, their own personal little cell, forever. Freedom for humanity will be gone forever if these technocrats are allowed to continue to implement these systems of control.
You know what I just realized? We're after our quitting time. We're past.
Whoops.
But you know what? We're already past that. Given all the stuff that's going on, given the fact that I got to this affiliates that carry us that need to cut out. We bid everybody farewell and thank you for listening and join us again next week. I'm going to continue here for just a little bit longer because these are really unprecedented times, and so. We'll just go ahead and continue for just a few minutes here for those that are on our stream and for those that are able to stay with us. This audio, this is Kevin McCarthy on the floor of the House talking about this rule change.
Mr. Speaker, Speaker Pelosi said in this exact chamber just a few weeks ago, and I quote, "We are captains of the ship. We are the last to leave." But proxy voting calls on Congress to abandon the ship and be the first to leave for months or possibly for the rest of the session. The Speaker is on the brink of launching the most significant power grab in the history of Congress. It runs counters to 230 years of House rules and even the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, our founders would be ashamed that we aren't assembling. I want every American to understand what it means for their members of Congress, to whom they lend their voice in Washington. It means that you can stay home for the rest of the year but still get paid for the rest of the year, where many Americans will not be paid. It means that they can let someone else, Speaker Pelosi, consolidate power and do their job for them when they could do it for themselves. And it means that they will only participate in legislative theater while shutting your voice out for the real lawmaking process. A virtual Congress would be a Congress that is connected to the internet but disconnected from the American people. That isn't fair to our constituents, our colleagues, or our country. And it undermines the very purpose of representative democracy as our founders designed it.
So there you go, Kevin McCarthy. I don't know if you have anything additional that you wanted to say about that whole situation.
No, I think, is there a lawsuit about that?
Not that I'm aware of.
If I were a constituent of one of the members that was staying away, I would want my party to do something about that. You know, to get them back in session. They should be filing a lawsuit with the Supreme Court. They don't have to go through district court, because this should be original jurisdiction for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought all that up, aside from the fact that it is important, is the reality that we have all this stuff going on right now. Congress has been, according to the Constitution, trusted with the power to call up the military to put down insurrections, which this is what this is. They have the power to do that, and they're not even there. They're not even meeting. One chamber, anyway. The Senate is, but the House is not. And so that's the question. All right, I've got one more clip from this press conference. There was a question about the decision that Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey made to pull the police out of the Precinct 3 and abandon it. That's the precinct that they were basically handed over. They just handed it over. Now, the governor did not agree with that decision. Evidently, there's been some tension there. He's been, pretty diplomatic. They're both really Democrats. In fact, the governor, they got kind of a weird party name. It's like Democrat Workers Party or some kind of, I forget exactly what it's called, that the governor is a part of. Yeah, it sounds pretty communistic, actually.
Pretty commie, all right.
But anyway, everything's being done for the workers. He didn't agree with the call, though, that the mayor made to basically withdraw, to retreat, and to hand over the police station to the rioters. Anyway, so this is the comments that he made about there's a question about that, and he answered the question.
Governor Walz, I didn't realize Mayor Frey was not going to stay for questions. In retrospect, I know you were not on board with the decision, apparently, to abandon the Third Precinct the other night. Did that have the effect of emboldening the protesters again tonight? And did it change the tactics you used to protect the Fifth Precinct in terms of not abandoning that when it was under?
Yeah, and I think this is a good time. I think I want to make sure that in critiquing on this and today of being asked questions, my intent is not to critique the decision that Mayor Frey made. The criticisms about these decisions, especially after last night, as we talked about that being a pivot point, those criticisms they end with me. And the situation as it came out, with that being said, yes, I think so. I don't think you can have this. And we heard people talking about you can't allow this to happen. The way I understand it happened in New York City is what they're trying to do. So yes, I think you have to hold these. They're one thing, they're important strategic positions, but it is a psychological effect. These are folks that are trying to, and chaos. Those fires burning out there and people being scared, and the governor of Minnesota standing here at 2 a.m. makes them as happy as anything can be. That's the goal. Our goal is to provide peace and security and a decent life for people they don't care about.
Quick follow-up to that. Why wait to accept the help offered by President Trump if it looks like even calling up 1,000 more troops isn't going to be enough? You're so vastly outnumbered. Why not tell him tonight, yes, we'll take him, and try to put an end to this?
We are talking about it, and I think one of the things is that what that number looks like, that's what we're trying to understand. I want to be clear with everyone. It is not and again, resources and things like that. It is not a small step, going back to Insurrection Act and posse-comitatus, about having federal forces on land. Now, with that being said, it's simply irresponsible not to look at all sources of there. So this is not about a resistance to using that. It's about understanding what are the checks and balances in terms of what are you going to get by doing this. You imagine federal military, Army folks on you. These folks want that fight. Now, if this ends with a massive presence and a conflict with folks who are trying to bring that is not bringing back order. So we're assessing it. General Jensen, I don't know if you want to say anything about how we look at this. We are not denying them. We're looking at it. We're assessing if this is enough. I have to, again, be candid with all of you. We're looking at doubling the size of the force of putting people on there. And my assessment with my team and looking at the numbers and what's going to happen tomorrow is to decide, is that enough? And that's what's happening right now, Tom. And the answer might be no.
So there you go. That's what I've got in terms of the riots.
You know what just occurred to me, that if they do send the military in there, they will have to do it full force as if they are at war and shut down the whole riot thing. Because what has the potential to happen, especially the way this guy is talking about numbers and, having the numbers of people, my worry would be that they just draw law enforcement from all around the country, weakening the other areas of the country, and have the rioters pick up in those other areas where you've weakened your force.
Yeah.
So I would think, what they need to do is bring in the military and shut the whole darn thing down.
Well,
no messing around. If you're on the street, you're going to get killed. Well, period. End of story.
We're assuming, of course, that's assuming that this is a real, that there's a real need to do that, and that this isn't somehow being orchestrated for the purpose of engineering public opinion to beg for martial law. And see, that's the problem I've got with all of this. I think this is a paradigm that's been created to get the public, just like the coronavirus, just like COVID-19.
Wouldn't be martial law.
You're begging to be locked down. People
wouldn't be martial law everywhere, just in the areas where they have the problem.
Yeah, but look how many major cities have a problem. I mean, you're covering most of the population.
That's why they've got to go in, take care of the problem, and get out. They can't diddle around, trying to handle it like a domestic law enforcement.
Well,
they've just got to go in and shoot the people and get out. Go in, put an end to the problem, and get out.
The problem is, Vicky, anytime you give government that type of power, they don't relinquish it.
Well, neither would these rioters. So you take your pick.
That's the problem.
Our military in control, or do you want these rioters who loot and burn and kill people?
That is precisely the problem, right there.
Mm-hmm.
I believe this is an engineered scenario designed to create this paradigm where people are. It's like pick your poison.
I'll go with our military every time. Every time.
Well, I don't know. I don't. Honestly, I think the situation, if they would empower, I don't know, because if there's really a numbers problem, all I can say is don't give up your firearms, people, because I don't think it's very clear the government is not going to protect you. The government is not going to protect you. And even if they want to protect you, even if they mean well, even if the intention is there, clearly they can't be in all places at all times. And you just heard the officials say, well, we put together a force we thought would be adequate, and it was not enough. We regrouped and organized and strategized, And then they changed their strategy, and it wasn't enough. It's clear that they can't solve the problem, apparently. So where is this all going to go? I guess that's where we're all left, is ultimately, where is this going to lead? I'm afraid where we're headed with all of this is some kind of lasting totalitarian police state type of situation. And it's probably been engineered for that purpose. Sorry to say.
That's a possibility.
All right.
I have to admit.
I got Jenna on the line from Olympia, Washington. I'm going to take her call, and I think we'll wind this thing down. Sorry for going long. We got into the thick of this thing, and I literally, for the first time doing this show, I lost track of time, and I didn't realize we went past 2 p.m. Eastern. All right, so let's go to Jenna in Washington, and Jenna, you're on the air.
Surprise.
Oh, it's Brian.
Brian and his sidekick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm hoping that by next week, this false flag staged event in a long series of just that will be all exposed, and we could possibly get on to other seriously important things.
I agree.
The situation where I've asked if you would have on Dr. Martin Paul from Portland, Oregon, and Vicky said, "Oh, I'd like to talk to him." And with Lark in Texas, I'm thinking that this has gotten, a bigger and bigger thing where I see callers calling in to John Statmiller. Can you tell me what this virus and 5G might have something to do with? Well, Dr. Paul, from a scientist standpoint, would love to have the data to link that, but he doesn't have. But what I have is a pretty clear linkage to it. That being this contract tracing. My dentist says I'm supposed to go to the parking lot, call on my cell phone so that I can get checked out with a thermometer before I go to the dentist. All of this technological implementation is going to be the boogeyman that I am concerned about. But as to the communitarianism subject, we're having to go to Europe to get people to discuss this between Dr. Paul and Lark. I think, people like John Statmiller that listen to Obama say we need this tech to pull America out of the trash can and our economy. See, John knows the tech is important to his gaining some employment or his money stream coming in. So we need to realize the technological slavery that is absolutely key to this. And Jenna has put in a bunch of links in the chat room. The Amitai Etzioni being interviewed, what does communitarianism have to do with this virus, Professor? And he lays it out very explicitly, and his son just happens to be in Seattle, starting, he's a major player in the technology, safe, smart, driving cars. This is his thing. Hey, I've got the answer to all of the world's problems. We learned them in Israel, where we've been dealing with these terrorists, and the answer is technology. Everybody, is there a mark of the beast linkage to the cell phones and the smart everything? Of course, you aren't going to do anything without. So that's kind of my interest. I see somebody like Breiser in Israel, and he takes all kinds of flack from the Graham Hart Show listeners that he needs to, get back to our focus on it's the Jews and we need to go get them. And he just says, no, I think I'm like this Lark's feeling on this, and I'm going to pursue it. He has a Fiona Marie Flanagan on, and she is completely on board with him on this communitarian nightmare being the big kahuna.
Yeah.
She goes on a different broadcast called Gran Torino. And
okay,
actually,
I'm going to have to wrap this up. I haven't listened to all these broadcasts. The point is though, communitarianism, Amitayat Zioni, certainly something that needs to be studied and talked about, and we do here. Unfortunately, many others don't understand it even after all this time. It's the balancing of way rights in favor of the community or the whole, the well-being of the community upheld at the expense of the rights of the individual. And certainly that's something Amitayat Zioni right up there front and center, George Washington University. People can look that up, and certainly I would direct people, like you said, to the links in the chat room that Jenna put there, because I think that that is something that's very, very critical. I'm going to have to let you go because I need to wrap this thing up, but I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. All right. God bless you. All right. There he is, Brian in Washington. And so I guess we'll just leave that here. And again, sorry we got a little off track as far as time is concerned, but given the circumstances, it's something that we ended up, I guess it's just like everything else today, Vicky.
Hey, it started off that way, discombobulated, and it ended that way. It's perfect.
Well, at least we're consistent.
It's balanced,
Yeah, we're consistent that way. All right, folks, we're going to wrap this up. Hopefully next week things will go more smoothly. Although the problem is with this breaking news, I find that you're focused on the breaking news, and there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of planning things out properly.
It's kind of coming at us fast and furious, isn't it?
It's kind of an on-the-fly type of situation. So we do the best we can. Anyway, folks, just pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. Keep yourself informed. Keep yourself safe. Keep your firearms handy and your ammunition, because we don't know where we're headed, but whatever it is, it doesn't look good at this point. And I wish I could leave you on a more positive note, but that's just where we are right now. All right. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Darren. Have a nice weekend, everybody, and you, Darren.
Yeah, you too. And we'll talk to you again next week. God bless you. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.